First things first is I'm going to claim fair use as we are going to be reviewing history, as history is one of those things that is always good for others to review and see what they think about those things. But first, before I do that, I'm going to put a something in the chat, and we're going to dive in on history. We're going to really dive in on history. We're going to really take a big look on the historicity of the Bible, and we're going to see what everyone's saying about it. Now, it's very important to know that Messiah is a very, very factual person, and that we know this for sure. So remember, fair use, right? In U.S. copyright law, the document that believes, except obviously we're going to be reviewing this thing, right? For criticism. We're going to be doing this for criticism and obviously reporting and teaching and bringing the truth to the matter of history. So let's close that. So right off the bat, let me just quickly share some things with the family. All right. Because we're going to get right into it. We're not even going to do a 10-minute wait. We're going to say the Lord's Prayer. So our Father in heaven, honored be thy name. May thy kingdom come. May thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us each day our daily bread, and forgive us of our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us on a righteous path and guard us from the evil one. In your name we pray. Amen. Now, as always, we get pinpoint to the accurate of history. So let's dive in.
Hello ones. On this video I'd like to talk about the historical figure of Jesus of Nazareth, as reported by the ancient Romans, or as his name was probably pronounced in his language, Yeshua. Some people try to prove he existed at all costs, accepting all evidence a priori. Others try to prove he didn't, refuting all evidence without even looking into the actual context. This is a critical historical investigation, so I will try to be as unbiased as possible, even though implicit bias, unconscious bias is inevitable to a certain extent. I'll do my best to be as fair as possible in my evaluation of the ancient sources, some of which we will read in the original Latin, and draw a picture of how solid of a historical figure Jesus actually was when examining what the ancients said. The video will not be about doctrine or beliefs, as I would never use my platform as a way to push my personal beliefs onto my subscribers. I respect you and your personal beliefs. At the end, having examined
Obviously, again, the quick intro. This is a person who studies on history. Obviously, taking a look. If you don't know about this person here, the reason why we're going to be doing this because I think this is one of the most in-depth videos I've seen of someone who's not a believer actually bring out sources of Messiah and things like that. So he actually did what someone on here asked, could they do a video on what Jesus looked like? So he actually did a video on it. So it's really interesting. He does a lot of history. So we're going to be looking at that in great detail. We're going to be really breaking it down. So I'm going to also be pointing to some individuals in his comments because they have some very interesting things to say, which most likely we won't need to look at it. But I just want you to know that we're going to be really breaking down this history. We're going to be really looking at the details of it. Shalom, shalom, family. So we got Ja here. It's going to be a very interesting day.
fairly, I will draw my conclusions, but feel free to let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments below. So, what sources are we going to use? On this video we'll examine mostly non-Christian evidence, with just a couple of exceptions. Publius Cornelius Tacitus, one of the greatest Roman historians and senator of Rome. Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus, Roman historian, early imperial era. Titus Flavius Josephus, Romano-Jewish historian born in Jerusalem, at the time part of Roman Judea. Gaius Plinius Caecilius Secundus, better known as Pliny the Younger, Roman magistrate, lawyer and author. Emperor Trajanus, Emperor Hadrianus. For non-Roman authors we're going to read from Lucian of Samosata, a Syrian satirist and rhetorician, and Mara bar Serapion, Stoic philosopher from the Roman province of Syria. Now we're going to jump right into the historical mentions, and at the end of each mention I will give you a sort of validation, so I'll tell you how much validity that mention has. But in order to fully understand and appreciate these mentions, there are two things that I need to talk about, and I'll do that in the second part of the video, so make sure to watch until the end because they're very important. First, the actual historically most plausible date of birth of Jesus of Nazareth, which is now most historians agree that it's not going to be 1 AD, it's a different date, and I'll tell you about it, I'll justify it historically, and secondly, the most probable date of his actual crucifixion. And these are important for the following reason. Usually people
So obviously we're going to be looking at that too. We're going to get pinpoint accurate to the time of these things. So we're going to get really pinpoint accurate with the time of these things.
trying to disprove the existence of historical Jesus use these 2 points of argument. The source materials that we are going to examine are not contemporary to his life. If such an important man was to be around, Roman authorities would have definitely said much more about him. Both statements are actually very interesting, but ultimately hold no water, and I'll justify this because of 2 reasons. First is the actual contextualization of when Jesus existed, which is very important, but secondly, it's also the real historically accurate perspective of Roman central power. So again, make sure to watch until the end. First, we're going to use the surviving portions of Tacitus' 2 major works, the Annales and the Historiae, where he speaks about the reigns of several emperors, such as Tiberius, Claudius, Nero, basically after the death of the first emperor Augustus in 14 AD, all the way up to 70 AD, which is roughly speaking the date of the first Jewish-Roman war, which dates from 66 to 73. It's in his final work, Annals of Imperial Rome, Book 15, Chapter 44, that Tacitus talks about Christ. He talks about his execution by Pontius Pilatus, who was the 5th governor of Judea under Emperor Tiberius, and the presence and existence of early Christians in Rome. In this book specifically, he is chronicling the burning of Rome, which happened in 64 AD. Sed non ope humana non largitionibus principis aut deum placamentis decedebat infamia, quin iussum incendium crederetur. But all human efforts, all the lavish gifts of the emperor, and the propitiation of the gods did not banish the sinister belief that the conflagration was the result of an order. Ergo, abolendo rumori, Nero subdibit reos et quaesitissimis poenis adfecit, quos per flagitia in visos vulgus Christianos appellabat. Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Auctor nominis eius Christus, Tibero imperiante per procuratorem Pontium Pilatum, supplicio adfectus erat, repressaque in praesens, exitiabilis, superstitio rursum erumpebat, non modo per Iudaem, originem eius mali, sed per urben etiam, quo cuncta undique atrocia aut pudenta confluunt. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hand of one of our procurators, and a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome. As a Roman historian, Tacitus had no Christian bias. In fact, he had no sympathy for the Christians. He speaks about their abominations, and he speaks of Christianity as the origin of evil. And when he uses the expression abomination, he's actually referring specifically to the early Christians believing that they were partaking, or at least some early Christians believing that they were partaking of the literal body and blood of Christ every time they were taking the sacrament, which sounded as an abomination to Roman ears. So what Tacitus is telling us here is that Jesus was executed by the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate, for crimes against the state, and a religious movement of his followers sprang up in his wake. Remember, this is not seen by Roman authorities as a positive thing, it's seen as a negative thing. We could in fact refer to this as the first documented confrontation between early Christians and Roman authorities. Also, please notice that Tacitus never accused Nero of being the one who burnt Rome. Such accusation will come from Cassius Dio in the 3rd century, but what Tacitus is saying is that Nero, in his opinion, was using Christians as scapegoats. From this statement we learn that there were a sizable number of Christians in Rome at the time, that it was possible to distinguish between Christians and Jews in Rome, and that at the time pagans made a connection between Christianity in Rome and its origins in Roman Judea.
All right, so first and foremost, let's understand the history of what's going on today. Now, what we're going on, we're actually going to the root. And just to confirm that all these things had happened the way as it happened after we review this, I'm going to have a bonus at the end, and we're going to look at some historical quotes on Peter and John, on the first century saints. That's why it's important to make sure you know your history, unless you be taken for everything. So that's what we're doing today. This is going to be one of the most in-depth historical studies that we had did up to date. So it's going to be very, very interesting.
Okay, so let's discuss the validity. Most scholars consider Tacitus' explanation and mentions of Jesus and his execution to be of high historical value, and it is generally considered to be an authentic, independent Roman source. To add to that, you have to remember that when Tacitus wrote history, if he considered the information that he was presented to be not entirely reliable, such as hearsay or something that he hadn't witnessed himself, he would normally add indications for the readers. No such indication has been added to this specific mention. As a negative point, however, I do need to mention the fact that no original manuscript from Tacitus is preserved to this day, and the majority of what we have are copies, or we should say later copies, some of which were made by Christian monks. Now, were the contents of this message changed or altered in any way by the medieval monks that were copying this manuscript into their own abbey? Well, of course, we can't know for sure. Most historians agree that the message is authentic. However, I do need to point out that a spelling correction did happen. Some sort of alteration did occur. In fact, at the time, two kinds of spellings and two kinds of words to speak about Christians were used. Christianos with an I and Christianos with an E. The medieval version instead will always be Christianos with an I, and we notice that there is a space in one of the two manuscripts between the I used for Cri and the Stianos, and that is because originally probably was written with an E, which would have filled the gap, but that was removed as a form of correction by monks. So yes, some alteration happened, but most scholars believe that the message is authentic. Now let's talk about the very famous Testimonium Flavianum written by Josephus, a very famous Romano-Jewish historian. But what do we mean by Romano-Jewish? You see, Josephus was born in Jerusalem, and he was the leader of the forces in Galilee that fought against the Romans. So initially, he was an enemy to Rome. The thing is that when he faced the legions of Vespasianus in 67, he was defeated and captured. Now, the only reason why Vespasianus, or Vespasian, didn't kill him is because supposedly Josephus had prophesied that Vespasianus would become emperor. And in fact, 2 years later, in AD 69, Vespasianus does become the emperor of Rome, and he likes Josephus because of this. So he keeps him first as a slave, then as a translator, and eventually, when Josephus fully defected to the Roman side, he is granted Roman citizenship, which is what we mean by saying that he was Romano-Jewish. He even served as the translator when Titus, Vespasianus' son, led the siege of Jerusalem in AD 70. He wrote the Antiquities of the Jews, in which he mentions several biblical figures, including Jesus Christ, John the Baptist, James, the brother of Jesus, Pontius Pilate, the Sadducees, the high priests, and the Pharisees. So all of this can be cross-referenced with the Gospel. At this time,
So obviously, this is why I also love talking about Flavius Josephus, as he also is mentioning here. Flavius Josephus, the first century historian. I like to see first century reports on the time frame of Messiah, so that we can see if it was something that many people actually recorded on, and what's the truth behind it, right? Because a lot of different conspiracies come up hundreds of years later, but we got to be careful on examining the first results of what we see of these things. So he's just talking about Flavius Josephus. I had talked about this before, why it's important to use him, because he's born almost right after Messiah is there, and he would be obviously there during the time the saints will be walking around and talking. He made a prophecy. It came to pass. His prophecy actually came to pass. It's historically recorded. That's what he was talking about, that Josephus' prophecy came true. And then obviously Flavius Josephus gave him the name. His name, I mean, not Flavius Josephus, but Titus, Flavius, pretty much his name, pretty much the emperor that had been elected during the time of the selecting of the empire has basically been Vespasian, right? He's the one that actually gave Flavius Josephus his name. He gave him the name Titus Flavius Josephus, but his name was actually Joseph um, bin Netanyahu. Just to have that clarification there. But he was a high priest Levi, so we're going to be really bringing out him because he's also going to be a great source because he knows the culture and he's also in Rome with Roman records. So he's a great source. We couldn't have a better source for this time. So it's very, very great to have this source. So let's keep on going with this.
Time there was a wise man who was called Jesus, and his conduct was so good and he was known to be virtuous. And many people from among the Jews and other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die, and those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion and that he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah, concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders. Now, of course, this is a very powerful testimony, but we are not 100% sure if we can fully trust it. Most of the testimony has very strong historical validity, but a Jewish man who had defected into Rome, calling Jesus the Messiah, and specifically speaking about the resurrection after 3 days, are thought to be maybe Christian alterations. It is, however, widely accepted that this testimony originally consisted of an authentic nucleus with a reference to the execution of Jesus by Pilate, which was then the subject to interpolation. Now, this is a very big discussion and I can't really jump into it in details because just from 1937 to the 1980s, 87 articles have been written about the validity of this, and there are people taking their stance in all sorts of positions, people that say it's completely useless, people that say it's 100% correct, and people that take a sort of middle ground. I take the middle ground. I believe that the nucleus, the core, speaking about Jesus and his execution, are correct, but it is possible that both the resurrection and the mention of the word Messiah were added. It is also interesting to see that there is another writer, a Christian writer, the very first one to speak about this testimony specifically, and it's Origen. And hear what he says. Origen said of Josephus, although not far from the truth, he did not believe in Jesus as the Christ, an affirmation that was repeated in his Contra Celsum. Because of this, I believe that it's highly likely that he did actually mention Jesus Christ and the crucifixion, but he didn't mention the other two things. Otherwise, this Christian author wouldn't have even have any reason to complain.
All right. Let's pay a little more attention. Also, let's see what he just said right here. I want you to see what he just said here because this is also very important.
Added. It is also interesting to see that there is another writer, a Christian writer, the very first one to speak about this testimony specifically, and it's Origen. And hear what he says. Origen said of Josephus, although not far from the truth, he did not believe in Jesus as the Christ, an affirmation that was repeated in his Contra Celsum. Because of this, I believe that it's highly likely that he did actually mention Jesus Christ and the crucifixion, but he didn't mention the other two things. Otherwise, this Christian author wouldn't have even have any reason to complain.
All right, so what did we just hear? So basically, Flavius Josephus doesn't believe in the Messiah. That's very important? Why? Because that means he's unbiased. He's not just a person who is a person who believes in Christ, but he's someone who's recording history. Let me show you something that he wrote. Let's go down and show you that we actually know that he knows that Jesus was the Messiah, but he didn't believe him as in what he did. I'm going to show you that he actually did believe that Jesus was the Messiah. Let's see. And what do you mean? Obviously, Josephus never admitted that Jesus was the Messiah, but let's take a look here. So there's an interesting document of Flavius Josephus when he was basically dealing with some individuals that were pretty much in his time atheists. They were like scientists in a way. And this is what he wrote when he was studying on the prophecies of Daniel. He actually knew that the prophecies of Daniel came to pass twice, two prophecies. Let's actually read it. He says, indeed, it so came to pass that this Flavius Josephus, complete writings of Flavius Josephus, and I probably should show the book on here. So book 10, chapter 11. So Jewish antiquities. Let's go down. Let's take a look at this. Watch what he said here. And indeed, it came to pass that our nation suffered these things under Antiochus Epiphanes. So who is Antiochus Epiphanes? That's the whole thing that happened during the Maccabees. It's a very historical report. It's also important to know that it's also in the Bible in John 10:22. So that's very important to keep in mind that he's talking about that event of Hanukkah, what people celebrate as Hanukkah, they call Hanukkah. That was that event that happened with Antiochus Epiphanes. That was the 2,300-day prophecy. He says, according to Daniel's visions, right? Daniel 8, Daniel 11, and what he wrote many years before they came to pass. Now, watch what he says here. In the very same manner, right? In the very same manner, Daniel also wrote concerning the Roman government. Now, how did Daniel write concerning the Roman government? Let's take a look here. Let's actually go to Daniel and let's go to Daniel 9 and we'll go to 23 just for example. Let's take a look here. All right, so here we are. I'm going to go to the full chapter. Now, why is Flavius Josephus saying that Daniel wrote that the Roman government was going to destroy Jerusalem? How did he get that idea? Let's take a quick look here and get an understanding of it. So right here, starting from here, we're going to get a prophecy that was given to Daniel. It's called the 70 weeks prophecy. Now it has something very specific in it. It talks about the most holy. It says anoint the most holy in this prophecy. What's also interesting in this prophecy, it word for word says it's about the Messiah, right? That's why a lot of people, they were waiting for the Mashiach, right? The Yeshua HaMashiach that was going to come and bring salvation, the salvation for the people of the nation, right? What's important here is that there's a quote here. Let's read this part right here. It just talks about Messiah being cut off. And it says, not for himself, because he gave his life. Watch what it says here. And the people of the prince shall come. Watch what it says here. They shall come and shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. What city and the sanctuary is it talking about? We know exactly what city and sanctuary is talking about because previously it says right here, it says, know therefore and understand that the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the prince, shall be 70 weeks, right? Pretty much long story short with the whole thing, when it says basically 69 weeks in the last week and whatnot. What's important to know about this, take note what it just said, that the temple was going to be built before the Messiah came. So that means the second temple before it was to fall, Messiah had to come. Remember that. One more time, I'll say it again. Before the second temple was gone, the Messiah had to be there. That's 100% fact. That is a prophetic fact. That's important to know. So before the temple fell, the second temple, Messiah had to be there. Did he come there? Absolutely. Let's understand what happened in that time that Flavius Josephus is talking about. He says this, all right? Let's go back real fast. What did he say right here? He actually says right here, he says, going on that, talks about Antiochus, and he says in the very same manner, right? It says, and let's go right here, that our nation, in the very same manner, right? That our nation suffered these things of the Antiochus Epiphanes according to his visions and what he wrote many years before it came to pass. And it's right here, in the very same manner, Daniel wrote concerning the Roman government and that our country should be made desolate by them. So you see what it just said there? It said that the country should be made desolate by the Roman government. Now, how can it come to pass except all the pieces come to pass? That's what's important. Now, Flavius Josephus know that this prophecy was going to come to pass. He also know for a fact that this prophecy is tied to the Messiah. Does he admit the Messiah? That's a different story. That's a different story. It's a difference between someone confessing the Messiah and someone confessing that the prophecy came to pass. So here's an example of someone confessing that the prophecy came to pass that was about the Messiah. So using the understanding of discernment, he just confirmed that the prophecy in Daniel came to pass that was about the Messiah and the Jerusalem falling. That's very important because remember, Messiah came there and he said, he stood there in Jerusalem. He said, the sign of Jonah. The sign of Jonah, what happened? What's the sign of Jonah? He was actually crucified around 30 AD. It's actually important. He was speaking in 30 AD. And what did he say? In 40, the time of 40 is going to happen, right? What's important is in Jonah, in the story of Jonah, Jonah was telling them 40 days. But with Messiah, remember, he came back after he resurrected and he stayed there for 40 days. It's very important that it's also witnessed. And that's what I'm going to show you later on, that it's also witnessed by others that Messiah was there. Now, also, not just that, but we also know without a doubt, when we look at the whole picture, Messiah was actually talking about 40 years. And 40 years from that time, Jerusalem fell. And that's what was recorded by Flavius Josephus, that indeed these things came to pass as Daniel had prophesied, that our country would be destroyed by the Roman government. And where did Daniel prophesy that? In the book of Daniel chapter 9, where it talks about the Messiah. And he came there and the city fell. And we know for a fact that it says word for word that the city was built for the Messiah and is coming. Then the city will be destroyed. So that's an example of prophecy being told by a prophet, but maybe not giving you the clear picture, but under discernment is only one answer to that. So there's only one answer when we take in discernment. But this is just a tip of the iceberg of how deep this thing goes. So let's keep on diving with this and look at these historical reports with these things.
Let's now read the words of Magistrate Pliny the Younger, who was the governor of Bithynia in Asia Minor. The Christians were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light, when they sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ, as to a god, and bound themselves by a solemn oath, not to any wicked deeds, but never to commit any fraud, theft, or adultery, never to falsify their word, nor deny a trust, when they should be called upon to deliver it up. After which it was their custom to separate, and then reassemble to partake of food, but food of an ordinary and innocent kind. Later, Pliny writes a letter to Emperor Trajanus, and he specifically says that the teachings of the Christians were, open quotes, excessive and contagious superstition, close quotes. He also says that Christians attracted people of all social classes, of all genders, and of all ages. Now let's read the reply from Emperor Trajanus. The method you have pursued, my dear Pliny, in sifting the cases of those denounced to you as Christians is extremely proper. It is not possible to lay down any general rule which can be applied as the fixed standard in all cases of this nature. No search should be made for these people. When they are denounced and found guilty, they must be punished, with the restriction, however, that when the party denies himself to be a Christian and shall give proof that he is not, that is, by adoring our gods, he shall be pardoned on the ground of repentance, even though he may have formerly incurred suspicion. Informations without the accuser's name subscribed must not be admitted in evidence against anyone, as it is introducing a very dangerous precedent and by no means agreeable to the spirit of the age.
Now, it's important to understand when we think about these historical quotes, always remember that these historical quotes that we're looking at, they're in a certain time frame. All these things are in the first century, around that time. So always keep that in mind as we're looking at these things. Not just that, remember, one of the biggest things about this time, a lot of them don't like Christians. A lot of times when people think about Rome, they think Rome had made Christianity. But if you actually look at the details, I'm going to put John here. If you actually look at the details, you can actually realize that Nero, Domitian, all types of emperors hated the Christians. They were being persecuted. They had nothing to do with the Christians. In fact, they were trying to convert them back to their worshiping of the change, because the Romans actually didn't worship Christ. They worshiped Jupiter. In fact, they changed the traditions of the Greeks, which they had a different type of tradition, and they changed it over to the way that they basically Romanized it. And they had kept doing what they were doing. And they were trying to get the Christians to swear and to bend their ways to the ways of Rome. That's important to know. This is actually first century report. So just keep that in mind as we look at these things, that the Romans didn't really like the Christians, but yet they're writing about their existence and the existence of the teachings that they had.
Is extremely significant. First and foremost, what does the emperor mean when he says, the method you have pursued, my dear Pliny, in sifting the cases of those denounced to you as Christians is extremely proper? Well, you have to understand one thing about both Pliny the Younger and Tacitus. Both of them had the duty of supervising trials of Christians, which is precisely why they documented it. So in this letter, Emperor Trajanus is saying, yes, very good, you're doing well. They need to be stopped. But even more interesting is what he says about his gods, and this really gives us the first perspective as the first part of those two introductory lines that I mentioned at the beginning, the perspective of the Romans. Now this is the religious perspective of the Romans. When people tell you, why didn't the Romans do something if there was a man preaching in Judea such as Jesus? Why don't we have much more information about it? Well, the answer is, as you can read from the letter, the words of the emperor himself, from the point of view of the Romans, religious freedom was something that it was always granted. In other words, the Romans didn't care what god you were worshipping in your lands. Once it became a Roman province, all they wanted to make sure is that it remained under Roman control. But a certain degree of religious freedom was always given, so we shouldn't imagine that to the Romans it really meant much that a preacher was going around preaching some doctrine that they thought was strange. To the point of view of the Romans, you can worship whatever god you want. We beat you in battles, our gods are more powerful than yours, and that's all that matters. So why does the situation change now? Well, the reason why the situation changes now is because we're talking about Christians in Rome. So it is only when these followers of Christ enter Rome and Greece, so very, very close provinces to Rome, that the Roman authorities, the central power of Rome, starts to be actually interested in Christians. As far as Jesus was ministering in Judea, they did not care. Even the miracles, if you think about it, even if miracles were reported to Roman emperors or the Roman authorities, they would have been shrugged off either as superstition, as we can see, in fact, the word is used, but even if they were to believe it, this is how it would go. Our Kaiser, there is a man who is performing miracles in Judea. A magician in Judea? What sort of miracles? He can raise people from the dead. What people? Who did he raise? Oh, a friend of his by the name of Lazarus. Is that it? He raised a man? Okay, good for him. The point I'm trying to draw here is the only miracle that could have really interested Roman authorities could have been, sir, this man made an entire legion disappear. Or, sir, this man can multiply swords and armor. In other words, from the perspective of the ancient Roman, if it doesn't directly threaten Roman military control, it does not matter. From a Roman point of view, Jesus' birth means absolutely nothing, because Judea was considered to be a backwater province in the fringes of the empire. And even his ministry, which, if we are to believe the Christian reports, was only 3 years, wouldn't have mattered much to the Romans, which explains why, if they heard of him, they would have called him either a magician, a superstitious wise man, which is exactly what we are finding in the letters. It only starts mattering for the Romans once the followers grow in numbers and enter Rome. As far as the validity of Pliny the Younger's testimony, it's complete general consensus that it's authentic. Also because we have the letter of response of Emperor Trajan, which again speaks about the same things, so the two things can be double-checked and cross-referenced. It's authentic. Now let's talk about the words of Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus, who was the chief secretary of Emperor Hadrianus. He says, because the Jews of Rome caused continuous disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus, Claudius expelled them from the city. After the Great Fire of Rome during Nero's reign, punishments were also inflicted on the Christians, a sect professing a new and mischievous religious belief. Again, notice both the negative approach and negative point of view of these mentions towards the Christians, but most importantly, of historical significance, the mention of the instigator, meaning Chrestus, which is again a different spelling of Christus, both being a period for the time. Now, the validity of these testimonies at the moment is not questioned in the academia, and that is because you have to remember that the Romans were particularly meticulous when it came to...
All right, so that's a great question. Where did the word Christian come from? So you can see here, he's actually going to talk about it right here. So the historicity behind the word Christian, it was not given to them. Christ didn't say, call yourselves Christians. We understand that. But the Christians, that came from other people. Other people said, these guys are Christians. What were they actually saying? They were actually just saying they were like Christ. That's what they were actually saying. They were saying that they're Christians. In fact, he's going to explain it right here. So I'll let you hear that real fast one more time.
Is not questioned in the academia, and that is because you have to remember that the Romans were particularly meticulous when it came to both records, and these are all period. Now let's talk about non-Roman mentionings, and one of the most interesting ones is a letter written by Mara bar Serapion of Syria. To give you a little bit of context, at this time the writer was in prison and he was writing this letter to his son. He says, "What advantage did the Athenians gain from putting Socrates to death? Famine and plague came upon them as a judgment for their crime. What advantage did the men of Samos gain from burying Pythagoras? In a moment their land was covered with sand. What advantage did the Jews gain from executing their wise king? It was just after that that their kingdom was abolished. God justly avenged these three wise men. The Athenians died of hunger, the Samians were overwhelmed by the sea, the Jews ruined and driven from their land, live in complete dispersion. But Socrates did not die for good. He lived on in the teachings of Plato. Pythagoras did not die for good. He lived on in the statue of Hera. Nor did the wise king die for good. He lived on in the teaching which he had given." Now, even though on this letter there is no mention of the word Christos or the name Christos, or should we say title, Messiah, it is still interesting because he does call him the King of the Jews, which we know was not only an expression that was not used by the Christians, but it was an expression that is linked to what was written on top of the cross of Jesus with the letters in Ri, which translate Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judae, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. But again, beyond Rome, we have got the satirist Lucian of Samosata. In his writing, he's actually mocking the Christians. And here is what he says. "The Christians, worship a man to this day, the distinguished personage who introduced the novel rites and was crucified on that account. You see, these misguided creatures start with the general conviction that they are immortal for all time, which explains the contempt of death and voluntary self-devotion, which are so common among them. And then it was impressed on them by their original lawgiver that they are all brothers, from the moment that they are converted and deny the gods of Greece and worship the crucified sage and live after his laws. All this they take quite on faith, with the result that they despise all worldly goods alike, regarding them merely as common property." Now again, this is one of those non-Roman mentions that do not use the term Christ specifically, but they do mention the crucifixion. They call him a sage and a lawgiver. And also further on in his writing, Lucian mentions that the Christians were using sacred writings. But we still have more. In the Jewish Talmud, we have a mention of the crucifixion of Christ, which is again a non-Christian mention. It reads, "On the eve of the Passover, Yeshu was hanged. For 40 days before the execution took place, a herald went forth and cried, 'He is going forth to be stoned because he has practiced sorcery and enticed Israel to apostasy. Anyone who can say anything in his favor, let him come forward and plead on his behalf.' But since nothing was brought forward in his favor, he was hanged on the eve of the Passover." This was written between 70 and 200 AD. We already know that the majority of historians, scholars and biblists all understand and agree that 1 AD, the traditionally accepted date of birth of Jesus, is incorrect, and it's because of a calculation error made during the creation of the Gregorian calendar. That
All right, so we're going to be talking about the timeline as well. It's very important when we look at the timeline. It's also important to know that obviously there is no 1 AD on these things. Now, I'm going to go down real fast and we're going to talk about some very detailed history. But before we do that, I think it's important to get a good understanding what he's talking about when he says the incorrection with the timeline, because we're going to be looking at this thing on a census. So once he talks about a census, we're going to come and have a deep conversation on that.
is also strengthened by the testimonies that we have on the Gospels themselves. Both Luke and Matthew associate Jesus' birth with the time of Herod the Great. Now notice, the time of Herod the Great, not his son Herod the Great, who was the king of the Jews. Now Herod the Great historically, and that's a
So obviously, King of the Jews, he was obviously in connection with Rome, and Rome basically set him up as a client king. So he was a client, but he was not necessarily his own king, but he was set up by Rome. But let's keep on going. Let's hear what he's going to say about the census.
historically proven date, dies in 4 BC. So already
So is Herod's death historically proven? Let's take a look. So first of all, when you try to search up Herod on Wikipedia, do they have a solid consensus? No, they don't. In fact, they actually know that Herod's death is either is between 4 BC or 1 BC. You can get an idea of that. That's what they actually write on there. They'll say, when is Herod's death? A lot of different ones will say 4 BC or 1 BC. Why? Because the report by Flavius Josephus is what they're going by. That's the only thing that they're going by, and other reports that we're going to look at today, and the aligning of these things. So first, let's understand this. Flavius Josephus had talked about a what you call pretty much, long story short, he talked about a eclipse that had happened. We're going to look at that and talk about that eclipse. He talked about an eclipse that had happened during that time, but it's important to know, just to understand that Herod's death, which they say, Messiah's birth and a lunar eclipse, is just going to talk about that. And it just talks about both Luke and Matthew mention, obviously, Messiah's birth as occurring during Herod's reign, right? That's very important. Josephus relates Herod's death to a lunar eclipse, right? Then everyone says they think that's 4 BC. We're going to look at that and show how it's not 4 BC. It's actually not 4 BC, but rather Messiah was actually born in 4 BC and Herod died in 1 BC. How do we know that's true? Let's take a look real fast. Let's take a dive in these things. Before we dive in this, we're going to look at this census. So first I'm going to show you this, and then we're going to dive into the census because we're going to wait till he talk about it. But first, let me give you a little head start on those things. So census and the time frame. Let's understand those things are important.
Occasionally, the Emperor of Rome called for a periodic registration of all the subjects in the Roman Empire. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. Now, the census was not very popular, but one of the reasons why Rome went to all the work of actually doing a census was to guarantee that all the subjects of the empire paid all the taxes that Rome demanded. But for the Jewish people who had endured centuries of outside control, the Roman census was yet another mockery of their historic religious principles. But the Roman census was not voluntary, and there was no way some average Joe or Joseph could avoid it. Now, if you look into our Western calendar in some detail and piece together the calendar of events related to Christ's birth, you will soon see a problem. According to our calendar, Jesus should have been born in 1 AD. Why? Well, because a long time ago, the church split the calendar into two eras: BC, before Christ, and AD, Anno Domini, or in the year of our Lord. By the way, there's no year zero. Make sense? According to that, Jesus should have been born in 1 AD. Well, there was a slight glitch in the calculations that created our calendar. Here, in brief, is how that happened. In 525 AD, Pope John I asked a monk named Dionysius, a most humble and learned man, and known by his brother monks as Dennis the Short, to create a standard calendar for the Western world. Now, Dennis modified the Alexandrian system of dating, which had been used during the reign of Roman Emperor Diocletian as a baseline measure. Diocletian was a notorious persecutor of Christians. Dennis did not want to use a Roman emperor known for his cruelty to Christians as his baseline, and instead used the birth date of Jesus as the baseline for his new calendar. Or so he thought. According to Roman historians, the birth date of Jesus was believed to be December 25th, 753 AUC, Anno Urbis Conditae, meaning from the foundation of the city being Rome. Therefore, January 1st, 754 AUC, was considered the start of the Christian era. But Dennis changed 754 AUC to 1 AD in his calendar, and the rest is sort of history.
So as you see, if you got a little understanding from that, it's also important to understand that at this point of time, it just talked about how that calendar is off and there's going to be a census that we're going to look at. So let's let it go.
Issued a decree.
Let's let it go so we can talk about that census. So he's going to talk about it right here.
we can see that the date of birth of Christ cannot be AD 1, but it has to be sometime before 4 BC. I know it sounds strange to say that Christ's birth was sometime before Christ, but now another important event that can help us understand when exactly that happened is a Roman census, because it is mentioned again in the Gospels and in other accounts. But what is a Roman census? In ancient Rome, a census was the act of counting the people and evaluating their property for taxation in a given province. Now, Roman census happened all the time. So a number of censuses were most likely performed throughout the Roman world under Centius Saturninus. We know that an important census happened in AD 6, but then again that one is no use for us. But we also know that another very important census happened exactly in that area in 8 BC. Now this helps us because then we understand that Jesus' birth most likely occurred between 8 BC and 4 BC. Given the information of the murder of the innocents that again we have at the hand of King Herod, so obviously before he's dead, when he wanted every child born between age 0 and age 2 to be killed, and that does happen around that time, I believe that the most historically probable date would be 6 BC. Now that's significant.
So was Messiah born in 6 BC? So remember, like I told you about the report from Josephus, how he actually dates it between a eclipse. Let's take a look at this. Let's dive in and take a quick look onto the depth of history. So this is going to be the new complete works of Flavius Josephus, obviously a first century historian. Josephus, like we already talked about, this is a summary of the start of the taxation, the census that went from 4 BC to 6 AD. Yes, that's right. This census actually went 10 years, 4 BC to 6 AD. And let's take a look at that and how that's actually put forth. Now, I'm going to actually bring in one of the brothers in, Brother Ja. I'll just bet, well, you're already there. All right, so we're going to look at this real fast. Let's look at this thing. Now, Cyrenius, if I pronounce these words a little off, excuse me for that. We're going to pronounce these names as best as we could. Now, Cyrenius, a Roman, right, is actually going to be very important at this time. He's a senator, right, and one who had gone through other places pretty much. Let's go down a little bit because I want to get you right to the meat on these things. Let me get you right to the meat of it. Long story short, it pretty much talks about that census. Long story short, but the details on it, we're going to look at the exact details on it, and it's going to be very important. Let me go down and actually show you something real fast. I'm going to skip this part because this one just talks. This is just an interesting thing about the other individuals. I'm just going to go down from this right here. So this is what I want to talk about. So now you heard in the book of Matthew, the book of Luke, they get very detailed with these things. And why do we have to look at the census? Because if we go to Luke, let me put Luke down real fast. Luke 3. Right, Luke 3 gets very detailed on pinpoint time frames, and that's how we can know if this is true and what's going on here. Right, we got a couple things that's going on that's going to be talked about here, and then there's a couple things that's going to happen here. So I'm going to leave this right here. We're going to come back to this. I'm just going to leave that right there for a second. So let me just give you a summary in the book of Matthew real fast. So I'm just going to read this first part. So note how long the taxation was happening during the reign of Gaius Octavius. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. Thurinus, who is Caesar Augustus. Obviously, that's important to know that this individual, Caesar Augustus, and also Herod. Right, we're going to have Herod there. We're going to talk about these individuals and Herod. Right, not the one who killed the children. That's important to understand. This is going to be a different one in the book of Matthew 14 and Acts. So son of Herod, we're going to be talking about. So it just goes down and talks about it. It says, but when Herod was dead, behold, an angel appeared, right? Told Joseph, you already know the story. I'm just going to go right here. Watch what it says right here in 22. But when he heard that Archelaus did reign in Judea, right? Now, this is going to be a different individual. We're actually going to have a couple of different Herods. It was very interesting to look at this. Did reign in Judea in the room of his father, Herod. He was afraid to go thither. So it's important to understand what happened. Messiah was born, and then Herod died, and another king came on the throne. That's what we got to find out. What's the in between? What's the time frame here? What's the pinpoint for these things? So obviously, I got something prepared for you. I'm going to show you something real fast. Let's just dive in. I got something that I was going to do a straight presentation on this thing, but I end up seeing someone end up touching on it. That's the great thing about being a believer. I don't know what he's doing right here, but that's a great thing about being a believer, that you can get other believers that already went through these things, because obviously we are the last ones to be here. So let me show you some things on this thing first. So this is what it's going to talk about. I'm just going to show you a quick intro on these
28
things.
years stems from Cleopatra VII's death, which occurred nearly a year after the very firmly dated naval battle of Actium, where Octavian, i.e. Augustus, defeated Mark Antony. Others with this is Pontius Pilate. Everyone has Jesus.
So first thing we're going to start with finding the pinpoint accuracy on this thing. We're going to find out, when did Pontius Pilate live? And it's historically recorded, when did Pontius Pilate live? Because remember, they also have the Pilate stone. So they have a lot of information on these things. So let's look at this thing very quickly.
Jesus being crucified under Pontius Pilate. Josephus's infamous statement about Jesus has him with Pilate, and even Roman historian Tacitus does in his history work as well. And since Pilate's time frame as prefect is from 2627 to 3637 AD, is then that Jesus' ministry and death has the same lower and upper bound limits to them. Looking back at Luke is that he lists 5 more chronological references to the 15th year of Tiberius, including Pilate being governor. So he was being extremely specific as to what year John started his ministry in, and shortly thereafter, Jesus started his.
All right, so now let's get some clarity. As always, I'm always going to give these videos with some clarity to it. So let's go up real fast. When was the time, right? That's why we went to Luke. Let's read it, what it says up here, because it talks about all these things in great detail. It says, now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. This is very specific. All we have to do is find out when was the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar. It's not that simple, though. It's not just easy as a Google search. So that's what we're going to look at today. So obviously got Pontius Pilate there being governor over Judea, right? That's also important that Pontius Pilate is also governor of Judea with Tiberius Caesar. We're going to look at these things and all these things. And remember, Pontius Pilate has to be between 26 AD, and he also has to be between 29 AD. So he has to be in the time frame of that time frame. So remember, it has to be the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, where Pontius Pilate is governor over Judea, Herod being tetrarch over Galilee, and his brother Philip. It's important to understand all these are historical characters. Philip, the tetrarch, this is actually going to be someone who's also over that area as well. And you got some other ones there. And then you got this other one that's going to be talked about. We're going to get into detail on these things. So first, if you've never seen the video we made of the 70 weeks prophecy, here's an example. I'm just going to let it play so you can see the quick understanding on when is the reign. Remember, we're looking for the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar's reign. It's also important to know how he reigned and all those things. So I'm going to play this for you. Sorry that's so blurry, but you're going to see how that is, just straightforward. In fact, there's there's other prophecies like this prophecy, but I want to show you something historical on this prophecy. It has a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of solid information. A lot of solid information. For example, Luke 3:1 says this. This is great because it gives us a certain time frame. It is a time frame because we know in the time that John was baptizing, we know that Messiah was baptized. As soon as he started baptizing, it's very important to understand that. So watch what happens here. It says, now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. Now we're getting to some people that people should know, right? For the sake of understanding history, that we can actually find out when was Tiberius' 15th year, and we got to find out what happened in that year, right? Pontius Pilate being governor in Judea, which at first they thought Pontius Pilate was made up until they found what was called the Pilate stone. If you ever seen that, it's a really interesting thing. They found the Pilate stone, which pretty much the Pilate inscription that pretty much says that Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea. They found it in Greece. So it was very, very interesting when they found that. That was just evidence that this person exists. It says in Herod being, obviously, they know that Herod exists. There's no doubt about that because he was set up by Rome, is even recorded, right? Being tetrarch understand it, this is what we have to know. Just this last part right here, right? Annas and Caiaphas being the high priest, the word of God came to John the Baptist, or John the son of Zacharias, in the wilderness. And then what do we see? We see some other things. We see what happens, the details of it and whatnot. Just to go a little bit about that, let's just look at those details. The reason why this is important, because if we look at those details, right, we can actually get an understanding doing. And then Jesus comes to precepts and bring it together with other precepts that must look at something here. I'm going to go back to a certain note. Okay, so right here. So let's look at this. Let's look at the information here, because I want to show you a quick summary of the answer here. I'm going to let you see that to go over here.
Luke 3 verse 1 says, "Now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar." What year? 15th year. History tells us that he began to rule in AD 12. So his 15th year would be what date? The 15th year of Tiberius Caesar's rule was AD 27.
All right, I'm gonna have to break this down a little more and I'm gonna get a little more detail. I know I didn't go deeper into detail. Let me go into detail here. So let's talk about the historicity of these things real fast. I want to tell you about these things. So it's actually important to know, a lot of people, when they see Tiberius, they will see, like, for example, Tiberius Caesar, right? Let's actually understand that when we see this quote right here of Tiberius Caesar, if we just, let's just say we just copy it, right? We just want to get a quick answer and we put it here. Or let's say when did, let's say, reign, right? When did he reign? And then what you will see, you'll see some different things. Look at this, 14 AD. So you will see this and you will see this right here and you'll be like, wait, 12 AD, but right here it says 14 AD. Okay, let's take a look here. Let's dive in. So real fast, this is also what we have to understand, the historicity of these things. Tiberius and Augustus is recorded historically as reigning together. And it's important to understand that Tiberius is actually not the son of Augustus, though that's a thing that some people may say, but that's not actually what he is. He's not a son of Augustus, but he became the ruler right after him. Now, it's also important, see right here, 12 AD, Tiberius governs the province jointly with Augustus. That's important to understand, right? To go down a little bit, we also got some other pieces of evidence for these things. You can see different reports. There's other reports by different historians that talked about these things, that talks about Augustus reigning together with him and everything. And go down a little bit. Here's another one for those things. So I'm not gonna read all of them, but I just want you to understand, if you've never seen this one on the 70 weeks prophecy, on this one it breaks it down, but from what it looks like, I want to get right into more detail. Right here, I go over it. I go over them, but I want to make sure I'm going over all the details here. I just want to make sure. In fact, I do right here. I'm going to skip this video on this thing because this is a decent summary, but let me explain it.
Predicted in Daniel 9. So
we're going to look at that too. So for the sake of understanding, every last piece in this is prophetically perfect. You can find the information on this. You can find, if you want to do a deep dig and find the actual written information, you can find the actual written information for the king of Tiberius and the time that he reigned. Now, it's important to understand, there's a lot of mixed views in this, but there's a clear understanding when you look at what history says. So it's very important to know that Tiberius actually was he co-reigned with Augustus Caesar. It's very important to understand that his start was actually in 12 AD. That's the time that he actually started. That's known throughout history. It's known in other sources and many different actual real historical sources that go over these things. All right, so just to make sure I got a little understanding on there, you can find a lot of different sources, a lot of different informations for basically the understanding. Just a summary right here, right? A number of lines of evidence are used to date the start of, obviously, Yeshua, Jesus, adult ministry, Luke 3:1, right? It says, as preaching in the 15th year, Tiberius Caesar, right, who started his reign, they say 14 AD, right, and all those things. But in Tiberius, is also important, 12 AD, Tiberius took joint reign, obviously of the Eastern providence. So it's very important to understand that, right? And that's how we actually can get to his 15th year. So when he began counting to his 15th year and get into those things, you get understanding on those things, right? So it's very important with these things. So that's why we're looking at it. We're looking at these things and putting these things together. We're putting these things together in the history of it. So you can see that. So I just want to show you that. I don't want to take too much time on it because I don't want the video to be too long, but I want you to understand that there is a lot of historical sources on this, and the description. This is how these notes will be. I actually put the descriptions. I put the note in the description. So this is going to be the first note. This will be the note of the history. You're going to also see a note of we're going to talk about the earthquake reports too. We're going to talk about the earthquake reports, and we're going to talk about Messiah's pinpoint, his year of birth and crucifixion, the exact pinpoint time frame. And I'm going to show you how that's 100% when we look at the calculations. Now you can see right here. So I just want to show you that so you know that this is actually a true thing, that this is actually something that had happened at that time. That is important to know, that Tiberius and Augustus reigned jointly. That's important to understand. So that's why understanding this is going to give you a clear understanding of these things. But let's keep on keeping on, because we're going to look at something else. Now we're going to take a look at something else. We're going to continue on this, and I'm going to show you something a little more deeper in it. So you can see right here what we just talked about, that 15th year. Let's keep on going with this.
Caiaphas's time as high priest lasted between 18 to 36 AD, which falls after Vardaman's second year proposal. So it just really...
Let me quickly explain to you what he's doing right here, because he's also breaking down other ideas that some have. But let me break down what he's actually doing right here. Remember, we already confirmed that Pontius Pilate, he reigns from 26 AD to right here to the time of his end. But in the time right here from 26 to 29 is what we want to look at. It's also important to know the 15th year. We also know that that's actually in the 27th year, right? The 15th year is actually the 27th year. That's important to know, that Messiah's life is actually going to be around this time. And also we're going to find his crucifixion and his birth. So first, let's take a look at something else now. Let's take a look at something else, a little more, to get an understanding on
Now
these
let's
things.
dive into Herod's death. Our only source is Josephus in his Wars and Antiquities works. In both accounts, they say that Herod lived 5 more days after he had Antipater, his son and heir, killed. So if anyone thinks that Matthew's massacre of the innocent in Bethlehem is not within Herod's sphere of evil, get real. Now Josephus said that Herod died 34 years after ordering Antigonus to be killed, and 37 years from him being declared king by Rome. And just a little bit before this, Josephus said that there was an eclipse of the moon. The special note here for us is that this is the only reference to an eclipse in all of Josephus's works. So, he was making it of importance because he tagged it with the event of Herod burning the brave men alive who ripped down the Roman eagle from the temple gate. Now, after Herod's grand funeral, Josephus mentions that the Passover was nearing as well. This helps us, as Herod's death occurred sometime between Josephus's one and only ever mentioned eclipse and the annual spring Passover. This then begs the question of when did those two events occur in the middle? Because the natural next step would, and will be, is to find their dates, then add 34 and 37 on and see where we land. But before that is that we can generate a grid of eclipses from NASA's generator. You can see that I selected Jerusalem in the search. You can pick anywhere you like in the world, but this will give us what they would have been seeing. Period would be the best, and this would create a very large gap in time to the following year's spring festival. Why those are eliminated is because Josephus mentions that Archelaus brought in the troops to quell any uprising, because the people were still very mad about Herod executing Matthias and the others who tore down the eagle. And this transition period would be the best time for a revolution to commence, as the next king hadn't been officially declared by Emperor Augustus yet. Because Herod just got done killing the heir Antipater and had to rewrite his wishes. So in haste, Archelaus sailed for Rome to claim the kingdom in front of Caesar because his brother Antipas was trying to claim the kingdom for himself. So the context does not allow for a long gap in time between Herod's death coming shortly after the eclipse to the following year's spring Passover. So we're down to only 3 possible combinations of eclipses and Passovers, with the giving lapse in time between them.
So obviously, family, I want to make sure you have heard me. So you see why they're actually talking about 4 BC or 1 BC, right? When we look at Herod, it's very important to understand what 4 BC or 1 BC. There's no in between. There's no 2 BC or 3 BC for Herod's death. It's either 4 BC or 1 BC. So we're going to actually have an understanding that the 100% is going to be 1 BC. That's what we're going to be looking at today. So this is actually going to be mentioned, obviously, by Flavius Josephus with these things.
Now, you might have noticed that the last eclipse is only 4 days after December 25th. So, is in reference to a toddler, not a newborn. But the defender will say that Luke also used paidion. Sorry to some of you out there, but the 4 BC date was basically established in the late 19th century by Emil Schur. His, and others of that view, their main arguments are that Josephus said Herod was named king by the Roman Senate in the 184th Olympiad, when Calvinus was consul a second time and Pollio was consul as well. The 184th Olympiad runs from July 1st, 44 BC to June 30th, 40 BC, as each Olympiad consists of 4 years, and also that you can see that Calvinus and Pollio were consuls in 40 BC. So, adding 37 years on and counting inclusively, meaning that you count 40 BC as a year, is that you land on 4 BC. Next is that Josephus said Herod conquered Jerusalem in the 185th Olympiad when Marcus Agrippa and Gallus were consuls. You can see that the span of the 184th Olympiad, with Agrippa and Gallus serving in 37 BC. So, adding 34 years on and counting inclusively again, is that you land on 4 BC. Next is that there is a 4 BC eclipse available for Herod's death to come shortly after. The added support to this would be to cite Rosh Hashanah's opening statement that the first of Nisan is the beginning of a new regnal year for kings in the spring. So, a Nisan to Nisan reckoning puts the 34th year in 4 BC. And the fourth would be to point out that Archelaus' rule lasted till his 10th year when Augustus banished him to Vienna. Josephus states that this occurred 37 years after the Battle of Actium, which was in 31 BC, so the 37th year falls on 6 AD when Cyrenius took over as governor of Syria, and reversing back 10 years is that it lands you on 4 BC again.
Now I'm gonna when this is finished, when this video right here, this little part, I'm gonna show you something so that if you're not understanding it, I'm gonna show you something so that you can understand it real fast. In fact, let me go to it real fast down here. And it's really easy. All it is about calculating a movement from a war. From a war, if you calculate it properly, you'll get an understanding. But you got to always remember AD, BC calculation. There's no year zero. It's just about this war right here. It's all going to be about this war. We're going to take a look and do the math on it and look at what's going on there, because that's actually what Flavius Josephus is going to say here. He's going to use that as a sense of understanding of time. And this is the part that we're going to look at here. But first, let's keep going.
So, because of these references, is that the 4 BC advocates place Jesus' birth sometime between 6 and 4 BC.
So you see what he's just explaining there? He's explaining to you why they got 4 BC right there. And I'm gonna let him also say it, because that's also what he got. That's also what he got. But I'm gonna show you the real answer. But first, let him speak it so I can show you what actually is the real answer.
Significant because if Jesus was born in 6 BC, then at what age was he actually crucified? Another event in Jesus' life that can help us pinpoint the date of the crucifixion is something that happened before, and it's very, very important. That is the baptism of Jesus, and at the same time of the baptism, something else happens. That is the famous event, gospel event, whereby Jesus literally rebukes the merchants at the temple because they were selling animals, and he didn't like that. It's a very famous gospel event. That event happened very closely to his baptism. The accounts tell us that incident at the temple happened after 46 years from the building of said temple. Let's now cross this gospel reference and Jewish reference with, again, Josephus Flavius, the Roman historian. He tells us that, again, this specific temple was built in 20 BC, which means 20 BC plus 46 years.
All right, so let me use somebody from his comments to answer this question real fast. So it's not hard to find when someone actually is going to be doing a lot of the math on these things and whatnot. You got to be careful when you're calculating AD BC calculations, as there are going to be very vital things to understand when calculating those things. So right here's somebody who does it. But let me go down. In fact, I'm not gonna keep looking for it. I'm gonna just give you the answer. So let's use an AD BC calculator. Let's use an AD. Let me see. I already got one over here. Let me close some of these. We don't need these ones, and we don't need this one. And to make sure I'm gonna keep that. All right. Let's use an AD BC calculator. So I'm gonna use 2, just so you can see that it's gonna get, if we're gonna get the same numbers, right? So AD BC calculators, they're really useful. Now let's note what times he say here. Before I show you this, let me show you how we know that he's wrong. Okay. First, let me show you something. First, I'll show you how we know he's wrong. Let me just type down something. Let me just type down Pontius, and then Pilate, and then his reign. I think I put, all right. I don't know why I put what's his name, but let me see. Let me copy it and use Google. I don't know why it showed me Tiberius. Let's use Google, because I just want to show you this again. Otherwise, I'll just show you on that other one. All right, see, now you see what it says, Pontius Pilate. When did he start to reign? 26 AD. Okay, so when did he say Messiah lived? Let me grab something here. I'm going to show you this. I think it's easier to show things visually. So I'm going to show you something visually. Watch what happens here. So I'm going to make a line here, right? And let's just say, obviously, what does Luke say? There's a part in Luke that tells us that Messiah was what? 30 years old, right? He was 30 years old. But it's going to represent Messiah. So right here represent him being 30 years old, right? So let's just use his concept. Let's say if Messiah was born at 6 AD, right? Or 6 BC. Let's just use that. Let's just see what that would look like. 6 BC, right? Let's see what that would look like. 6 BC going to this time right here. Now remember, Pontius Pilate at that time, his beginning of his reign, let's just put another line here, just underneath here, whether it's here, whatever. We'll put it right here, just so to show that it would be basically around this time. Because remember, Messiah was living during the time of Pontius Pilate's reign. That's important. And remember, he was crucified by him, right, after 3 years. What's important to understand is that this is what we got to do. We got to type down, because remember, we saw in Luke, in the book of Luke, that as soon as Messiah got baptized, he was 30 years old, and it said that's when Pontius Pilate was reigning. So remember, Pontius Pilate, let's put 26 AD, right? Let's put 26 AD right here, just to get an idea on the earliest he possibly reigned. So 26 AD. So what do we have in between 6 and 26 AD? Let's just do that. and take a look here. Let's just do that and take a look, just to have a good understanding. So obviously this is going to be calculating by summary. So right here, I'm going to put BC, and I'm going to put the number 6, right? 6, and then this one doesn't matter. We'll just keep them even. We'll just keep these even so that we don't do much right there, because we want to look at years. And then what BC? We want to go to 80. And we want to go to how old would he be in 2680. So how old would he be from here to here? Let's just get an understanding. 31 years. That's obviously not even in agreement with the prophecy. So obviously it can't be that time frame. So you obviously know something's wrong, because Luke writes down, right? I closed that, but let's look at that again, what Luke says, right? Go to Luke, and let's go to 3 and 1, and right there. Let's just take a look here. What does he say? He says, now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius, Pontius, being governor over Judea, right? You see what's going on right there and all these things? And then obviously the next thing that said, you see what it's saying right there? It says they all went to the country, they went to this area and whatnot, and they all went there. And he said, and that's when John was there. And then remember, it also lets us know that Messiah was there, and that was going to be the time of his baptism. Because remember, this is when John started preaching, and then we get the understanding that Messiah was 30 years old, right? In fact, let me just show that one. Let me go to that scripture. So obviously, the reason why I'm showing you this is because we know for a fact it's actually 23 down here. You see right here where it says Jesus himself being, right, began to be about 30 years of age, right? Right? That's very important, very, very important. 30 years of age. So you see what's going on here? Herod's there, Messiah's there. He has to be 30 years old. This doesn't work out. So you see what's going on there. He's not 30 years old. In fact, we know that it's actually 27 AD, because that's also going to be the 15th year of the one who was reigning, right? So let's go back over here, and let's understand this now. Let's understand it. So Tiberius had to be reigning at that time in his 15th year. That's very important. And Messiah had to be 30 years old. So obviously, taking history and understanding those things, that's not going to work, because also remember, it's also recorded by other historians that Messiah was there crucified by Pontius Pilate during the time of his reign. So this is very pinpoint. But let's keep going. Let's keep on digging in and looking at this thing, because now we're going to get the perfect understanding on these things. But let's let him finish. Let's let him finish what he's saying right here, to hear a little more on what he's saying.
Are in 26 AD, which would be the year of the actual baptism of Christ. Now, connecting this with the previously explained information of Christ's actual date of birth being 6 BC, that would mean that his baptism occurred at age 32. This already creates a completely different story, because it also tells us that most likely he didn't actually die at age 33, but he died older than that, and it is very possible that his death or crucifixion, even though I can't really give you a specific date, would have happened sometime before 37 AD, which is the death of Emperor Tiberius. This is interesting because it pushes everything a bit forward. It tells us that he was alive longer than we thought. It tells us that he was born before that we thought. And it also means that if you look at these two dates now, the historian Josephus Flavius that we are reading today was born specifically in AD 37, which means he would have been born sort of immediately after Jesus' crucifixion. So he would have been basically contemporary. And Publius Cornelius Tacitus himself, who was born in 55, it would have been very close to the very end of Jesus' life and then the beginning of the ministry of his followers. All of this is interesting because it means that the majority, not all of them, but the majority of the accounts that we have read today would have happened within approximately 40-50 years from Jesus' death, which is extremely close, and we could say basically contemporary from a historical standpoint. I mean, when we talk about a lot of the information that we say about Alexander the Great, well, some of the things are actually 400 years after. Not everything, but some of the things are 400 years after, and they are still considered valid. So I would say that these events and the testimonials that we have read, the majority are relatively contemporary.
So let's look at these contemporary facts. So let's understand what's actually the real math here. Let's do the real math. Obviously, it's not 6 BC to 37 AD. Let's actually get the understanding of here. Let's get the understanding.
Looks like a pretty good case, right? All the numbers seem to point to 4 BC at first glance, but the 4 BC date has challenges to it because Josephus adds more chronological details to Herod being declared king and his conquering of Jerusalem. Starting with the conquering of Jerusalem with its supposed date of 37 BC is that Josephus said more within the same statement by saying that this occurred exactly 27 years after Pompey's siege of Jerusalem, which occurred in the fall of 63 BC. So this moves the conquering from 37 to 36 BC. The fast, highlighted in pink, lets us know that this happened on the Day of Atonement, which is the 10th day of the 7th Jewish month. Josephus tethers another statement to this by saying that this ended the Hasmoneans' rule of 126 years. 1 Maccabees chapters 6 through 9 put the peace deal with the Romans in 162 BC, and adding 126 onto that gives you 36 BC as well. But Josephus included another significant detail about this year. He said that before this was a sabbatic year. Yes, these were still being practiced during the Second Temple period. Josephus explains how every 7th year that the Jews were letting the land rest, as the law required. 2 Chronicles explains that Israel's failure to keep it was part of the exiling punishment. And as such, the returnees learned this lesson and began keeping it again, as seen in Nehemiah, with the people agreeing to follow the Sabbath land rest rule. What adds to the 36th position is Wacholder's research on the topic, as he found 10 sources that can be dated with great accuracy and historically do fall on intervals of 7 years with significant events attached to them. And this makes a lot of practical sense because if you're going to attack a nation, you might as well do it when their food supply is really at its lowest. It shortens up the siege length considerably. But also on the flip side is that if you're trying to launch a revolt, then your people are also way more available to be organized and fight, like Bar Kokhba tried to do in 132 AD. So, working off of the other 9 is that Herod's conquest must fall on the Tishri to Tishri overlap of 37-36 BC, with Herod's 3-month siege taking place during the summer and ending on the Day of Atonement, which, according to Finnegan, is October 25th, 36 BC. 2nd century Roman historian Dio said that Rome did nothing significant in the Syrian territory following the consulship of Claudius and Norbanus. You can see that their consulship was in 38 BC. So, 37 BC is the year of nothing, with the following year, 36 BC, being the year that Herod conquered Jerusalem. So, Herod's first regnal year over Jerusalem didn't start until Nisan of 35 BC. That places his 34th year occurring from the spring of 2 BC to the spring of 1 BC, which the January 10th 1 BC eclipse.
All right, so let me see what's going on. So the sound, you see, it sound like the sound went out or something. But make sure to see where we at. I'm getting up to 34. All right, let's see if the sound play again. All right, let me
January 10th, 1 BC eclipse falls within, but does not
all
allow
right, we're
for
good.
the December 29th, 1 BC eclipse, as it falls 9 months after this one.
So now pay attention. This is where we're going to get to the pinpoint time of Herod's birth. I mean, Herod's death. When did Herod die? And you're going to see precepts, obviously historical precepts connecting these things together. Precepts, historical precepts. But you're going to see historical connections connecting this thing together that we know for sure this is the time frame. So we got two eclipses. That's why they say it's either 4 BC or 1 BC. That's why they say that. But we're going to find out which one it actually is and see how that actually agrees with all the historical reports.
Window, and likewise the March 13th, 4 BC eclipse way before it. In regards to Herod being named king by the Roman Senate, is that Josephus tethers his naming to Titus's destruction of Jerusalem with a 107-year time frame. With the destruction occurring very firmly in 70 AD, and then reversing back is that it places the Senate's naming in 38 BC. That connects with Josephus saying that the conquering was in the 3rd year of Herod being made king. And one more tethering statement that puts the 40 BC.
Did you catch that? What it just did there? This is very important. Look at this quote. Look how accurate this quote is. It says, according to the number of the high priests, from the day until the day when Tacitus took the temple and the city, right? From when he took the temple and the city, he says it burnt them and all those things, all those things. He says it was 107 years. So going back, obviously, from the time when Tacitus took the city, that's talk about Jerusalem, going back all the way, this is going to go to the time frame. What is it actually talking about here? What is it actually trying to point us to? It's pointing us to this. Let's read this report. It says when actually, let me not confuse it. Let's actually I'm gonna let him finish it so you can get a clear understanding here. Just understand what's going on. He's going back to this time frame, and this time frame, he's gonna show you how we're gonna get to 1 BC. 1 BC. So
view to rest is that Josephus says that the Battle of Actium occurred in Herod's 7th year, which lands you on 38 BC for the start of his Roman regnal years, and thus puts his death in 1 BC. Another drive-by point is that when he was about to die, Josephus says that he was nearly 70 years old. Why this is a really precise number is that it takes us back to his first position as governor of Galilee. Josephus says that Antipater, Herod's dad, made himself procurator of Judea in the 9th year of Hyrcanus II being the high priest, after Pompey's siege of Jerusalem and being restored back in the high priest position. Adding 8 full years onto this is that it lands you on 55-54 BC. Then, after Caesar sailed back to Rome, is that Antipater made Herod governor of Galilee at just 15 years old.
So take note. This, if you didn't understand the ones before, note Herod right here. He's with his father. Note Herod is 15 years old at this time. 15 years old, and that's, remember, he dies at age 70. So we're gonna get a clear understanding when he died. So 15 years old, recorded historically, he was 15 years old,
with the included statement that he was very young. Now, since Herod was 15 in 55 BC, is that this makes his 70th or his birth year in 7069 BC. Thus, adding on the nearly 70 years is that it puts you on 1 BC, not 4 BC.
How do we know? How do we also know that this is correct when we think about these things? Because remember, Messiahs. Let's look at this again. Because now I'm gonna let him explain it real fast over here. I'm gonna let him explain that time frame that I kind of skipped, or well, didn't too much pinpoint. I'm gonna pinpoint it now, and I'm gonna show you this time frame because it's very important. Why? Let me close this. The reason why is because if you've ever seen the 70 weeks prophecy, it has a pinpoint time frame accurately. It's an accurate pinpoint time frame, right? It also has an earthquake report, right? It talks about when Messiah, at the last time, he has an earthquake that had happened. We also get let's go a little bit down to the pinpoint time, and let's see, do we get that time? Do the person actually say that time? And I'm gonna show you that he does. But he doesn't know that he gets that time, but I'm gonna show you that he does. I'm gonna show you that he gets that exact time frame on these things. So obviously Messiah being born in 4 BC, right? A little bit, a time when he was 30 years old. Let me see if this has it right here. Right here, he's 30 years old. By the time he was 30 years old, it was 27 AD. Is it 27 AD of his baptism? Do we ever see that it's 27 AD of his baptism? I'm going to show you something. Let's let the person say it right here. I'm going to show you.
Crucified. Another event in Jesus' life that can help us pinpoint the date of the crucifixion is something that happened before, and it's very, very important. That is the baptism of Jesus, and at the same time of the baptism, something else happens. That is the famous event, gospel event, whereby Jesus literally rebukes the merchants at the temple because they were selling animals, and he didn't like that. It's a very famous gospel event. That event happened very closely to his baptism. The accounts tell us that incident at the temple happened after 46 years from the building of said temple. Let's now cross this gospel reference and Jewish reference with, again, Josephus Flavius, the Roman historian. He tells us that, again, this specific temple was built in 20 BC, which means 20 BC plus 46 years, we are in 26 AD, which would be the year of the actual baptism of Christ. Now, connecting this with the previously BC, which means 20 BC plus 46 years, we are in 26 AD, which...
All right, so did you just hear what he just said? He said, this is what he said. He said, I don't know, I'm sorry why I made this look like this. Let me see if I can make it look a little less squished up. I'm putting it down here. 20 BC, right? 20 BC plus 46 years. Now, what is 20? I'm just going to take away that BC. That BC looks just ridiculous. I'm just going to put 20. So 20 plus 40. Now, if you do the math on a calculator, you probably already know, you can just do it off your head, right? What's 20 plus 40? It's 66, right? Or whatever. But that's when you got to pull out a calculator and a timeline. On a timeline, you can do this yourself. Just put a negative, and then what you actually got to do. Now, if you first do it, I'm going to show you something, what he did wrong. Most likely this is what he did. I'm going to show you something. I'm going to show you something real fast. Just grab a calculator real fast so you can see it. You can do it on a calculator. Negative 20, that's BC, plus 46 years. What am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? 27 AD. Oh, I got the answer. No, that's wrong. Why? Because in AD BC, right? AD BC, you got to have a year. There's no year zero. So you got a plus one. So you got to plus a one to that. And what does it get you? 27 AD. That's exactly when Messiah was baptized. Let's do it. Let's do it right here now. Let's try to get that time to see if that's what we're going to get. Let's put right here for BC. Let's put 20 BC. So he said it started in 20 BC. And on this one, I can't do like pluses or anything. So I'm just going to put the answer right here. I'm going to switch. That's supposed to be BC. Let me just make sure it's put in BC. And then AD here, make sure that's AD. And then 27. How many years do we get? Do we get 46 years in between? Yes. We get 46 years in between from 20 BC to 27 BC. Isn't that what he said? He said 20 BC plus 46 years. Isn't that what he said? Now watch, let's do it on another calculator. Let's do it on another calculator to make sure that this is what we're getting, right? I'm showing you that obviously when you come here, you're not dealing with someone that's ridiculous, that doesn't know what they're doing. I want to show you that these things are true. So 27 BC, and then let's calculate. Do we get 46 years in between that? Let's go down. Yes. 46 years in between that. What does that mean? He did the math wrong. That means he did the math wrong. So that means he's doing math wrong on multiple things. There's multiple things he's doing math wrong. So you see that his own statement, in fact, that's what many of the people in his comments were saying. A lot of people in his comments were saying, you're doing the math wrong. You're actually doing the math wrong on a lot of those things. A lot of those things you're doing the math wrong. Who was at this time? Messiah. Messiah being born in 4 BC, Herod also being there at that time, died in 1 AD, right? That's enough time for Messiah to live and for Messiah to flee to Egypt. And then what did he do? Search for the kids after 2 years. And then after a short time, he died. After he died, then it said that Messiah in the 15th year of Tiberius, which we actually date the 15th year of Tiberius to that time. And I'm going to show you another way you can find out the exact pinpoint time. But you can get the pinpoint time of these things 100% accurate. What does that mean? What did Messiah do after this? 3-year ministry. How long was that 3-year ministry? It's also prophesied in the gospel. It's also prophesied in the gospel how long it was. It was 3 years. It ended up being his crucifixion in 31 AD. What's important about that in that time frame? It said in the gospel there was an earthquake. Was there an earthquake that happened in the time of Messiah's crucifixion? Yes. There's an earthquake report in the land of Israel that actually happened in that time. Now you may see here 33. Is it exactly 33? Absolutely not. No one can pinpoint earthquakes. Rather, every earthquake report is an estimate, especially ancient earthquake reports. In fact, you can see right here, just to get a little understanding on those things, it'll tell you right here, it's between 30 to 33 CE or AD, right? It says this is actually a real report. All following dates in this list are CE. It says an earthquake identified in obviously the area of the Dead Sea by the Roman source and whatnot, reported by the Gospels to have taken place during the crucifixion of Jesus. So you can see this is actually a real report. Here is it on the government site. You can see this was a real report. Obviously, remember, this is an estimate. So around that time, the exact pinpoint time is 31 AD to be exact. That was Messiah's crucifixion. That was Messiah's crucifixion at that time. So let's look a little more detailed on it. Let's take a little more detailed look on these things. So I just showed you with the math that 46 years in between that time is going to get you that time. So what did I just show you? From 20 BC plus 46 years is 2780, right? So I just showed you on these things, and I'm going to let him continue on saying what he's going to say, because you got to see what the last thing he says after looking at all these historical reports. Just to make it clear that that's what he was saying. He wasn't saying 21 BC. He was actually saying 20 BC. So I'm going to let him say it one more time.
Again, this specific temple was built in 20 BC, which means 20 BC plus 46 years, we are in 26 AD, which would be the year of the actual baptism of Christ. Now, connecting this with the previously explained information of Christ's actual date of birth being 6 BC, that would mean that his baptism occurred at age 32. This already...
So you see it yourself. So I just wanted to show you that he's not accurate with everything. Not everyone who, especially all these things. How can I talk? Oh yeah, Shalom fam. I'll drop a link for you in the description. So I'll just put a link there if you want to join. You can click the link. So obviously that's how detailed we get. Understand that when I'm looking at prophecy, when I'm looking at genetics, when I'm looking at linguistics, when I'm looking at geographic studies, I may not have the best pronunciation. I may not be able to say all the Latin words like a lot of people can say and all these other words. But I'm telling you, when it comes to this math, I'm not playing no games when it comes to the scriptures and when it comes to history. The pinpoint accuracy of scriptures and history is pinpoint accurate. Let me show you something real fast. It just froze real fast, but let me show you something. One more calculation to show that this is real. Here's a report by Flavius Josephus. When Cyrenius or Cyrenius had now disposed of obviously this person's money, when the taxes were come to a conclusion. Now it's important to understand the taxes came to a conclusion. Let's see when it came to a conclusion, which were made in the 37th year of Caesar's victory over Antony, right? Am I saying that right? Antony. Remember this place, this historical place that we were just talking about, this war, right? This historical war that had happened. I'm gonna just go down just to, you can look at the history on it just to make sure, just a summary on those things. You can see a couple different things. Again, just talk about some things. talk about that war. I'm just going to go down just to show you it. I'm not going to click it. So right here, this war right here happened in 31 BC. That's uncontested. No one contests that. Uncontested. Everyone knows that that war happened in 31 BC. All right. Now let's look at something. I'm going to show you how it's pinpoint accurate. So I'm going to go up here. Let's go back up here. So obviously right here, he says right there was in. Now watch what he says here, which were made in the 37th year of Caesar's victory. Let's work with that. What do we got to do? We got to find something from the distance from 31, right? All we got to do is do this. 31 BC, right? 31 BC. And then we got to put a time that is going to be 37 years apart. So what is 37 years apart from that time frame? I'm just going to put this down. Is 680. So that's 36 years apart. So remember how it was right there? He said it was going to be 37 years. Let me actually fix that real fast. Let me actually put that there real fast. It's actually going to be, let me go back. And in fact, oh yeah, that's what's important. It's important also to know the pinpoint on that. Let me actually put that there because that's also important to know, because notice he's also saying right here, he's telling us right here that the conclusion had happened at that time of after this his victory over these things. Is also important to know what he's talking about here when he's saying right here, he took one of the high priests and basically switched it over and made another priest there. And then he's going to talk about Herod. We're going to talk about that after this part right here. So first, let me show you this. I'm going to put 31 and I'm going to put 7 because I actually have to type down to put the month, because we got to put the on this type of thing, we got to put the month on these things to get the exact one. It actually is going to be 6. But let me actually show you, because I want you to see it. I want you to visually see these things. Let me actually put it down real fast. And it has to do with this event right here. This is very important. Let me make sure I click it. Well, I'm going to show you with the exact month, September. Okay, so we got to put September here. So we're going to put September 2nd, right? And then what time frame is Josephus, what time is he actually saying that this is? Where is it? Right here. What time frame is he saying this is? Let's go up a little bit. At least I think that one's on this one. Let me see. Let me see. I think that screenshot, let me see, make sure I put it up here. Unless I didn't put that screenshot on here. It's supposed to be a second one underneath it. So we'll put that. Just making sure. I mustn't post that screenshot on here. I got these, but not that screenshot. That's all right. Let me see. Just making sure it's not there. All right. That is fine. But pretty much, I got to get that screenshot for that clarity there on that thing. But understand it's going to be early in that year. It's going to be really early in that year, I guess, just to make it clear, just to move forward. Because I'm going to put that screenshot on this thing. So this note will be here, and also I'll put that screenshot in there. But just to show it a little bit, this one was a little earlier. So this one was actually going to be right here, AD. Let me make sure it switched to AD. And this one switched to BC. I think it even restarted. And put it back to 31, September 2nd, and then right here, 680. But this one was like it was somewhere early on in spring, right before summer, just to get a little bit on that. I forget. You got to get the exact time for that. You got to get the exact time frame for that. But I got to look again and screenshot it so that I can put that on there. But I got you on that, family. I'm gonna put that on there. But just to get a summary on it, just to get a little summary, let me just, because I got it on my phone, the Flavius Josephus. Maybe I can screenshot it real fast and throw it on there. Let me just throw that real fast on there. Let's see. Just scrolling because I want to show you the exact month on those things because the exact month changes a little bit. It basically will tell you what it would be, pretty much. Um, let's see real fast. All right, here it is. The complete works of Flavius Josephus. While I'm grabbing this real fast, I just want to say it's really interesting. You know, when you're studying history, you want to grab the sometimes on events. You want to grab the months on events because those are going to give you very detailed things on these things real fast. In fact, I don't want to make any dead air. Let me see. Let me make sure I'm at the right page real fast so I can screenshot it. So book 18, not gonna take me that long, I think. All right. I'm at book 17. Just going over real fast. All right. Okay. Just grabbing this thing, beloved family. All right. I'm actually, let me just type down this thing to do a quick word search. Serenius. Actually, there's another way I can do this, but I do it like this. Because what's important is the month here. I'm gonna grab that real fast. There it is. Let me see. That would be on, where is that? Alzheimer's month on the center. I have plus measure constitution. Undercount was a great to Syria. Took around such that. Okay. All right. So it's when he came to Syria. And in fact, that's right. That's actually I know what that quote is now. I don't know why I put it at the bottom. At least I believe I put it at the bottom. Just taking a look here. Down here. Where is that little quote? Right here. Let's see. It has to do with over here, but I thought I put it here. All right, it's all good. I don't know why I didn't put that thing here. I'm a screenshot it and I'm gonna grab it because actually it's not next to this quote, but it's on another spot on this quote. But I'm gonna grab it because it makes a big difference on the month. Just know that. Just know the month makes a big difference. The reason why I wanted to show you that because what this is actually gonna go to, because a month makes different. I don't want to keep guessing on the month pretty much. I'm gonna just put something here and just explain it pretty much because I know it's either I know it can't be fall from what I remember. It can't be fall if I remember, but it might be. I don't remember 100%. But from this point of time, it would have been between 1 BC all the way to 680. The reason why that's important, just that little piece, because this part. Let me go up real fast. Notice what it says next. It says, while Herod and Philip, because Herod and Philip, all right, Herod, this is actually going to be another Herod, right? He reigned in 4 BC. It's important to know when he reigned. Herod right here, Philip, there's going to be Philip, and there's another Herod right here, another Herod, and there's another Herod. There's actually a couple different Herods. So here's another Herod, but you got to note these last names here. And I'm going to show you something real fast with those. But before I show you that, because let me put this right here. Let me actually bring this over here. In fact, all right, so you see that? The reason why that's important is because this. So I'm going to scroll up and just give you the answer real fast. And I'm going to grab that thing. Right up to here. So the reason why is because the taxation went from 4 BC to 6 AD. That's important to understand because it's talking about the reason why I was talking about that one thing that happened on that quote. Because remember how it said right down here? Remember how it said right here? It said that this person, right, when he finished with the money after the conclusion, right, it was made on the 37th year on those things and whatnot. And then that came to pass on those things, which I need to grab the month on those things to get that, to show you that. And then this right here is actually talks about that it also happened while Herod and Philip was king. So obviously these two numbers are going to be 10 years apart when Herod actually became ruler over that area. And also the other Herod, when both of them, Herod and the other one, and Philip became ruler, that was be 4 BC all the way to 6 AD, just to get an understanding on that, just to get a summary. But I digress. I'm going to put that on here because I want you to see it word for word, even with it illustrated. So I'm going to let him also show you too. So I'm going to just go to it here and let him show you. And then I'm going to move forward because it's going to be a little more history to these
So
things.
Herod's death needs to be moved to 1 BC in all the history books, with the celestial events of 7, 6, and 5 BC being eliminated from contention, and recognize that
I'm going to go down. I'm going to go now to this one. So let's talk
the
about
4
this
BC
now.
date was basically established in the
Not
late
this
19th.
one. We already talked about this one. I'm going to go down real fast and show you this one now. The reason why I want to show you this one is because I want to show you now about the census again.
Now,
A little
all
bit
of
more on
this
the census. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the census here. So let's look at the answer here to get this answer on the census.
transitions us to Luke's census in his nativity story. Here, there are typically 3 attacks on the account. First, Josephus didn't mention the census, therefore Luke can't be fully trusted. Next one cast doubt on whether or not an actual official census would really force Joseph and Mary to go to Bethlehem to register. And the big one with Luke mentioning that Cyrenius was governor of Syria at this time. But it needs to be acknowledged up front is that if you've been going off of a 4 BC date for Herod's death, then you have been looking at the wrong time period the entire time, and have to take a fresh look at the 3 and 2 BC dates. First off, Luke does recognize the more well-known census in 6 AD when Cyrenius took over for Archelaus that coincides with Judas the Galilean leading a small uprising. But does anything look peculiar on this timeline right now? 6-7 AD was a sabbatical year, which is a perfect time to conduct a census. Unlike, 2020 with never-ending survey calls. But this sheds some new light with the 2-1 BC sabbatic year in proximity of Jesus' birth. Now, because Herod died in 1 BC, is that the artificial governor of Syria gap that Schuer and others create from 4 to 1 BC or to 180 goes away when it's recognized that Varus served as governor twice, as Josephus has him taking over for Saturninus, and had to stop a Jewish revolt that ensued after Herod's funeral and spring Passover. This war had messianic tones all over it. And Tertullian, who dated Christ's birth in 3-2 BC, said that the census was taken by Saturninus. And this statement doesn't undermine what Luke wrote, because guess what? Cyrenius was governor of Galatia at this time. Roman historian Tacitus wrote about all the great honors that Augustus bestowed upon Cyrenius, with Tiberius giving him a grand funeral in 21 AD. So, Cyrenius had already been governor of Crete and Cyrenaica before his time in Syria. He was named Roman consul in 12 BC, which I hope you understand is a pretty big, huge honor. Next, he led the campaign as governor in Turkey and served as legate in Galatia. Augustus also appointed him as tutor/trainer of Gaius Julius Caesar, Augustus's grandson, to train him up on political leadership because he was inexperienced but was next in line to be the emperor. Gaius Caesar died in 3 AD, but in that year, Augustus named Cyrenius Duumviri as the joint magistrate of the whole empire with him. Then appointed Cyrenius governor of Syria from 6 to 12 AD, when Augustus had enough of Archelaus sucking, and obviously he ended up conducting the local census and taxation after arriving. And on his death, Emperor Tiberius gave him a grand funeral in Rome. Needless to say, this is not some low-level chump here. This is Augustus's go-to man to get big tasks done. So, does a special appointment by Augustus in 32 BC to oversee a census really seem out of the possibility? Obviously not. And Ramsey's point remains true that Luke's history is rock solid. So there is no throwing baby Jesus out with the bathwater because of an argument from silence on Josephus's end. But where is the evidence of a census even taking place during this time, right? First, Josephus informs us that there were more than just one governor of Syria at this time. You have Titus named here helping calm the waters between Herod and Archelaus. Then also a man named Volumnius at the same time of Saturninus. And Josephus continued to speak of multiple governors of Syria ruling at the same time while Herod was still alive. Writing about the same time as Tacitus is Justin Martyr, who wrote his first apology, an apologetic work in some respects, and said that Jesus was born when Cyrenius became the first procurator of Judea and could be found in the Roman tax records of that time. The catch here is that Justin was writing directly to Emperor Pius and the entire Roman government, because he was more or less begging them to stop the persecution of Christians. So, he was telling them that the proof of his claims about Jesus was to go check their very own records. You don't do that unless it really occurred. The interesting thing about Justin calling Cyrenius a procurator instead of governor is that Tacitus, in his biography about his father-in-law's conquest of Great Britain, said that 2 men were set over the Brits. One was a lieutenant and the other was a procurator. The procurator's job was to handle governing the local properties, like with taxation and taking enrollments. But the neat thing is that Tacitus also called them governors. So, a procurator held the same authority as a governor of a Roman province. But still, where's the 32 BC census proof, right? How about right from Augustus himself? In his autobiography, he talked about how great he was. That included his conducting of 3 censuses in 28 BC, 8 BC, and 14 AD, where the people were registered, and that vows, or you could really say oaths, to him as emperor were to be made by the councils and priests every 5th year. 5th year from the 8 BC census is 3 BC. But look what he adds to this. Moreover, all the citizens, both individual and by their towns, of one accord repeatedly made supplication at all the gods' couches for my health. This matches exactly the description of what Luke said about Augustus' order in 2:1. Augustus also mentioned how he made Cyrenius consul in 12 BC, which was the same year that he was bestowed with the title of Pontifex Maximus. Then, in 2 BC, he instituted the Games of Mars that were played in the Circus Maximus, the Roman Forum, and the amphitheater, and finished building the Temple of Mars. So, you should be thinking Mardi Gras and the World Cup final on roids here. As he was explaining all of this, is that Augustus recounted the Battle of Actium, and that he had all the provinces swear an oath of allegiance to him. whereupon in 27 BC he received the title Augustus from the Senate and the citizens. Recall that Augustus held a census prior to the Roman Senate honoring him with this divine-like title. The note here for us is the order in which this occurred, because the very last thing that he recounted is how in 2 BC he was given the new title Father of the Fatherland, and it was given to him by the whole Roman people. That includes the provinces. The official bestowing of this new title on him took place on February 5th, 2 BC, so the regular people's oath would have been done before this in 3 BC. 2 BC also marked the Silver Jubilee, or 25th year, of Augustus's rule as emperor, and was also the 750th anniversary of the founding of Rome. This provides us with the reasoning why Augustus was throwing the biggest festival Rome had ever had. But, where's the 3 BC whole Roman world oath mandate, right? That comes from 2 sources. The first is in Suetonius' famous work, The 12 Caesars. He reiterated that Augustus held 3 censuses in 28 BC, 8 BC, and 14 AD, and that Augustus required the people to give him the same veneration as to the gods, i.e., deified emperor worship. 258. The whole body of citizens, with a sudden unanimous impulse, proffered him the title Father of his country. So the whole empire had to revere Augustus with this new title, and Suetonius adds that it first started with the commoners, which would have been conducted in 3 BC. This follows the same pattern that we saw in 28-27 BC with his new title as Augustus. In the book Roman Civilization by Lewis and Reinhold, is that they have the actual oath that each person has.
All right, you just take it a little long. Let me actually go to the next one because it's just a summary of all these events. This one's just gonna summarize it right here. I'm gonna let that one sit there real fast on that one right there. And just to get the summary on this thing, I just double looked and I realized that this right here, as you see right here, where let's read it one more time. All right, when Cyrenius had now disposed of what's that? I'm not going to try to pronounce it. This person's money. When the taxes were come to a conclusion, right? That's important to understand. When it ended, when the taxes end, when did this taxation end? Which were made in the 37th year of, this is actually important, right? Caesar's victory. We already seen that. That's why I put this here. Now, this is actually what I realized. Let me go back real fast. Because remember, it was September 2nd. And let me make sure that's BC. 31. And then right here, this one actually is 7 BC. So September, obviously coming to that time, not September, but sometime after that. Let me actually refresh it real fast. Right here, 31. And then this one will be sometime around when he was writing that, when what's his name came up there. The reason why is important is because going back here, let me go over here. I'm gonna go up here to this one. I probably got to read this one first. Now, Cyrenius, a Roman senator and one who had gone through other magistrates, he had passed through them until he had been consul, right? And one who, on account, was of great dignity, came at this time to Syria. That's important to know because he reigns at Syria. The reason why that's important because there is in Syria, right? When you look at the rulers in Syria, this is just a list of Roman governors of Syria. There's a time frame that has a gap. What do I mean by a gap? Right here, you can see this time frame right here between 4 BC to 1 BC. There's a time frame with a gap where actually the person that's reigning there is actually the one that's being mentioned here. I'm gonna go up here. So he says right here, it says at this time into Syria with few others, right? Being sent by Caesar to be a judge of the nation and to take an account of their substance. Then it just talks about all these things. It talks about what happened, right? Talk about this person, also a man of, obviously go down a little bit, moreover, made himself into right here. Moreover, right, Cynerius came himself into Judea, which was now added to the province of Syria. That's important because Judea ended up becoming underneath him. That's why you see in the scriptures in Luke 3, it'll tell you right there, it says this person, where is he on this one? Let me see. In fact, that verse, I forget where that verse is, but I have it on here. Let me go to that verse real fast. That verse is going to be Luke 2. So Luke 2, go back up here. Let's gotta go over one. Here, go back here. So right here, I'm gonna go back over one. So on Luke 2, this is where it talks about that individual right here. And it says, and it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And then note right here, and this taxing was first made when Cynerius was governor of Syria. That's important to understand. But when was he governor of Syria? If you look it up, it'll say a little later, like 6 AD, but actually he was there a little earlier. Well, not 6 AD, 180, somewhere around there. But he actually started a little earlier. That's why we're looking at this thing and the details of it, because it's going to give you the pinpoint on these things. So right here, just a summary of those things and whatnot. Just talks about the Jews. Obviously, they didn't want to be taxed. This just talk about how they didn't want to be taxed and everything. Right here, let me go down. So right here, just talks about, but the Jews, although at the beginning they took the report of a taxation horrendously, obviously they didn't want to, and they fought. They was basically fighting against the person. Long story short, and that's when you actually get the story of the Sakari, right? The Sakari come in. They got an interesting story about them or whatnot right here that talks about the Sakari. But the historians and Flavius Josephus and everything, they call them wicked. They say they're a wicked bunch. But they talk about them on this thing when they talk about the taxation and how they were fighting against them and everything. But long story short, let me go down and show you this down here. So it just talks about his victory over that area. And then that time frame, putting the pinpoint. I'm going to go down to this part because I want you to basically see it in the summary on this part. All right, up here. Actually, down here. Let me read this. Let me read this thing first. Where is it? Right here. Let me read this thing first and then get the conclusion on it. Because this one, I don't know why I didn't screenshot the month. I'm going to put that on there a little bit later. It's on a different note and I define it. But right here, it's important to know that the taxation, just long story short, it went 10 years long, about 10 years long. The reason why it went 10 years long, because if you look here, it actually talks about the conclusion of the tax. That means the ending of the tax, and it ended about the time of basically 37 years from the victory that happened in 31 AD. And then also note that it says right here, he derived this person from their priesthood, and says he appointed this person, and says while Herod and Philip had received their thrones and whatnot. Now, it's also important to know that there's a saying that Herod died after the people got their throne. Now, in 4 BC, the people got their throne. When I say the people, Herod's sons, they got their throne. But how did they get their throne? The way that they got their throne, it was a joint rulership. That's what it was. It was a joint rulership that they reigned together. And in fact, this actually probably is going to get that little summary on those things and whatnot. Let me go down just to make sure that's all there. All right, so let's look at that right here. Let me go down. This is the part that actually talks about it. I don't know why I put this underneath here, but this is pretty much it. It talks about, remember we looked in Luke, that summary right there. It talks about the taxation and everything. Here's a summary. So it's something that is mentioned by an individual named I don't know you say that, Carl George Winsler reports that pretty much that person in Syria, it says that, what's that, Ika? I'm not going to try to pronounce it. And Syria were united under one authority when he states, he just talks about the reason why it's important to know is because, long story short, there was a joint rulership again over the area of Syria. Long story short is that the person who ruled in Syria, he ended up leaving, but he ended up ruling in two places. Long story short, to make that as simple as possible. But let me go down right here. So this is actually the time frame he ruled. Long story short. But let me actually show you this thing and let him just play it here to go over those things.
If you're wondering about Archelaus's 4 BC to 6 AD timeframe, in that it somehow blocks Herod's death going past 4 BC, is that is simply not so, as they were described being co-regents with one another. Archelaus didn't have the same authority as Herod, but Josephus says that Archelaus had long been exercising royal authority before Herod died. You also see Antipater appealing to Herod to spare his life in front of Augustus, as he had already made him king. So, co-regency easily accounts for Archelaus's 4 BC start. And there are plenty of other places in Josephus that demonstrates this as well. The most likely counter to this is that upon Herod's death, Augustus carried out the splitting up of the kingdom amongst Herod's remaining sons. Philip the Tetrarch, who we saw listed in Luke 3:1, has his death and reign recorded by Josephus, saying that he died in the 20th year of Tiberius, and that he reigned as Tetrarch for 37 years. The 20th year being 34 AD, while using the Julian system, and reversing back from this takes you to 4 BC. So it seems like this limits Herod's death to 4 BC. However, David Beyer took up the issue and dug through all the available manuscripts and copies in the British Museum and the Library of Congress to see what was actually recorded. Finnegan writes, David Beyer reported to the Society of Biblical Literature his personal examination in the British Museum of 46 editions of Josephus's Antiquities published before 1700 AD, among which 27, all but 3 published before 1544, read the 22nd year of Tiberius, while not a single edition published prior to 1544 read the 20th year of Tiberius. Likewise, in the Library of Congress, 5 more editions read the 22nd year, while none prior to 1544 records the 20th year. It was also found that the oldest versions of the text give variant length of the reign for Philip of 32 and 36 years. But if we allow for a full 37-year reign, then the 22nd year of Tiberius, 35-36 AD, that this points to 1 BC as the year of the death of Herod. This is therefore the date which is accepted in this present book. Now, if you're wanting to dig into this,
All right, so I just let him just explain it just to get the summary on that thing because I need a screenshot on this thing. I need to update this thing. But we're gonna touch on this again because then I'm gonna make a, like we did before, just give a straight live on this direct topic, which is more a little pinpoint on the census. Talk a little more on the census. But here's the summary right here. Messiah was born in the veil of flesh, October 13th. How does it get October 13th? Let's take a detailed look real fast. I'm not going to go over this right now because this also requires a direct, detailed understanding, but precept upon precept, when we look at the scripture and look at the old scriptures on the reign or the time of the priests and all those things and whatnot, we can actually find out when John conceived by his father, the time that his father was in the priesthood, because the scripture tells us which time it was for those things. And then we can also understand when Messiah was born. He was actually born, long story short, on the Feast of Tabernacles. That's why, if you also think about it, Zechariah 14 says that everyone has to come up on the Feast of Tabernacles and worship the Lord, pretty much. But the Feast of Tabernacles represents dwelling with the Father. So, long story short, that's actually when he was born. He was actually born October 13th, 4 BC. 4 BC is actually the pinpoint on when he was actually born. Also, the 70 weeks prophecy confirms these things, cross-reference them, and they come perfectly together, even for the 3-year ministry. The 3.5-year ministry, because remember, in the 70 weeks prophecy, it says he shall reign for, basically, he'll be cut off in half a week, in 3.5 a week. Yeah, half a week. And that actually represents, half a week represents, basically you cut a week in half, right? 7 cut in half, that's 3.5. And also he was also crucified, which is also interesting, in the midst of a week. So it's like a double prophecy. So in the midst of the week, obviously on Wednesday, there was a day that he was crucified, right? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And actually he went in that night and whatnot. And then he's actually going to be, well, obviously Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. When we say day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, the midst of the day, the midst of the week, we're not. And then he would enter to the tomb, and then he rised up on between day 7 and day 1. And he rised up. And that's actually important because we can actually get that understanding in scripture. Even the time when he rised up, when it says at the beginning of dawn and everything, towards the first day of the week, going from there, even knowing the last day when he rose up, we can go, and that will give us a Wednesday. So we know that for sure. But it's also important to know the major details with these things. I'm not going to go over it now, but the 70 weeks prophecy goes over those things in great detail when we went over the 70 weeks prophecy. Earthquake report, 70 weeks prophecy, and the history actually shows that Messiah exists, that Messiah actually is there, but it's important to know the exact details. So I'll just give the answer. Here's the answer. Messiah was born in the veil of flesh, October 13, 4 BC, in the tiny village of Bethlehem during the Roman census that Caesar Augustus had ordered 4 BC to 6 AD, which is about 10 years long. Taking a census was a common practice for the Roman Empire. It allowed them, like the United States today, to track the population growth and the trends of their culture. Now, obviously, I don't agree with census, but that's history. That's history that was happening there. Long story short, the understanding of the Bible has so much historicity, yet the calculations has to be done carefully. You have to do the calculations carefully. And obviously, this note is in the description. If someone's more hungry, want to dig into these things, definitely all these things are here to see. But let's see the conclusion. What's the conclusion of all these things, of all the historical facts, of all these things? What is his conclusion? What did he come up to with a conclusion here? I'm gonna bring the brothers in. If you guys want to have a holy conversation on these things, definitely click the link right there, and we can talk about these things. But let's hear his conclusion.
And we could say basically contemporary from a historical standpoint. I mean, when we talk about a lot of the information that we say about Alexander the Great, well, some of the things are actually 400 years after. Not everything, but some of the things are 400 years after, and they are still considered valid. So I would say that these events and the testimonials that we have read, the majority are relatively contemporary. So, with all being said, in conclusion, what is my conclusion about the historical figure of Jesus or Yeshua? We have enough historical information to state confidently that Jesus of Nazareth existed and was a historically proven figure. His appeal extended beyond the Jews and included Greeks. Jewish leaders of the day had an unfavorable opinion of him. He was mostly ignored by Roman authorities until his followers started preaching, which justifies the reason why we don't have more information about him while he was still alive. He was then crucified when Pontius Pilate was prefect of Judea. And that concludes our journey, historical journey, into the life of Jesus as far as his historical figure is concerned. If you liked this video, please thumbs up, and if you want me to continue this and make it into a series.
All right, so as you see, this person studies the historicity of Messiah. He does not believe in Messiah. He doesn't believe that he's the savior of the world. But we know that he is, because all prophecy actually links to him. Not just that, but there's no doubt when it comes to historicity of Messiah, there's no doubt that he came to this world and he existed and his disciples lived. Now let's end this with this. I want to show you some real historical reports about the saints and what happened with them. So let's look at these historical reports on these saints.
Videos I've posted, I've done about 4 of them from this very book by Thelman J. von Brott. It was written in the 1600s as a historical document in which he totally details the lives of different Christians going all the way back to the apostles, the original 12 apostles. But as you can see, it is a very, very large book that details the martyrdom of different Christians, and many Christians, including the Baptists, the Mennonites, the Amish, they all consider this book to be historically relevant for Christianity, specifically the lineage of Christianity outside of Catholicism. So we're going to read today about the story of the Apostle Peter and how he was crucified upside down in Rome under the orders of Emperor Nero in AD 69. And the reason for that is because he did not feel worthy enough to be crucified as his Savior, Jesus Christ. And obviously you can read the account of Jesus Christ in this book as well. See where that page is. It looks like Stephen. As you can see, yeah, so it does detail the life of Jesus Christ, or at least the crucifixion of Christ. So it goes from Jesus Christ to the apostles, and then eventually to the Apostle Peter. So we're going to read that. We're going to read that story today, and you can find this on page 79 of Martyr's Mirror. And if you'd like a copy of this book, please feel free to send me a text message. I will get you a copy. And my phone number is 940-301-1663. Again, 940-301-1663. Simon Peter, the holy apostle, crucified with his head downward under Emperor Nero, AD 69. Simon Jonah, afterwards called Cephas in Syriac, but Petros or Petrus in Greek, was the brother of Andrew, a native of Bethsaida in Galilee, and a fisherman by occupation. He had his abode at Capernaum with his wife's mother. His brother Andrew, who was a disciple of John, first brought him to Christ, and shortly afterwards he and his brother were called away from the fishery to become fishers of men. See Matthew chapter 16, Mark chapter 3, John chapter 1, etc. He was diligently instructed by Christ, his Savior, and made such progress therein that he became the spokesman of all the apostles, being generally the most frank in asking and answering, as well as the most zealous for Christ, in order to prove to him his love and fidelity, although at times he manifested a certain rashness therein, on which occasions the Lord, like a father his child, faithfully instructed, and whenever it was necessary, kindly reproved him. See Matthew chapter 16, John chapter 6, Matthew chapter 18, etc. The Lord loved him in a special manner, and permitted him, together with James and John, to witness his glory on Mount Tabor, of which he afterwards made mention to the chosen, scattered strangers, saying, "We were eyewitnesses of his majesty." See Matthew chapter 17, 2 Peter chapter 1, etc. He was the boldest in offering to suffer with Christ, but the weakest when the conflict began. The Lord selected him and the 2 sons of Zebedee to watch and to pray with him in the garden, but his eyes, as well as those of the others, were heavy with sleep, which showed that though he was specially loved by Christ, he was nothing more than a weak mortal. See Matthew chapter 26. About his denying Christ we shall not mention anything, as this is not the proper place for it, since we purpose to speak only of his faithfulness and steadfastness until death. After the aforesaid denial, the Lord forgave him his sin and commanded him 3 times to feed his sheep and lambs, which he subsequently faithfully did to the full extent of his ability. See John chapter 21, 16, 1 Peter chapter 5. And one day there were converted to the faith by his preaching about 3,000 souls, all of whom were baptized and continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in breaking of bread and in prayers. See Acts chapter 2. He confirmed his doctrine through the power of God by signs accompanying the same, according to the promise of Christ, as is evidenced in the case of the lame man, Ananias, Sapphira, Aeneas, Tabitha, and others. Acts chapter 3, chapter 5, chapter 10, chapter 9, etc. The calling of the Gentiles was revealed to him in a vision from heaven, but as he was properly an apostle of the Jews, his ministry was most effectual among the circumcision. See Acts chapter 10, Galatians chapter 2. But since he was so excellent and worthy a man in his ministry, it pleased the Lord that he should also be one of his martyrs, to seal the truth of his doctrine not only with the mouth, but also with his blood, yea, even with his death. This the Lord showed to him shortly before his departure from this world, saying, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, when thou wast young, thou girdest thyself and walkest whither thou wouldest, but when thou shalt be old, thou shalt stretch forth thy hands, and another shall gird thee and carry thee whither thou wouldest not. This spake he, signifying by what death he should glorify God. John chapter 21. This was verified in him, for shortly afterwards he and John, his fellow helper, were brought before the Jewish council in Jerusalem and severely threatened to desist preaching in the name of Jesus, to which they both boldly replied, Whether it be right in the sight of God to hearken unto you more than unto God, judge ye. Acts chapter 4. Afterwards he was again apprehended together with the other apostles, but by night miraculously delivered out of prison by an angel. See Acts chapter 5. After that he was not only apprehended, but together with the other apostles, scourged and commanded that they should absolutely not preach in the name of the Lord Jesus. But they went away from the council rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. See Acts chapter 5. Afterwards King Herod stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And when he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further and apprehended Peter also, and put him in prison, and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers, intending after Easter bring him forth to the people. But in the night the angel of the Lord led him out through the midst of the soldiers, so that he returned to the believers, who rejoiced greatly on account of him. See Acts chapter 12. Finally, there was fulfilled, according to the testimony of history, the prediction of Christ, that he should glorify God by his death. For while he was at Rome, he was sentenced by the Emperor Nero to be crucified. But esteeming himself unworthy to be crucified with his head upward like a Savior, he requested to be crucified with his head downward, which he easily obtained, for the tyrants were forthwith willing and ready to increase his pain. This occurred, as it is stated, after Peter had preached the gospel for 37 years, and when he was 70 years old. See Eusebius, Library number 2, etc., etc. Also the writings from Origen. Side note, the historians state that the Apostle Peter wept very much daily after the ascension of Christ. When he was asked why he wept so much, he replied, Desiderio Domini, that is, because I very much long for my Lord. There are ancient writers who state that Peter cried every time he heard a cock crow. When he saw his beloved wife being led out to be put to death on account of having confessed the faith, he addressed her in these words, O my beloved wife, have the Lord Jesus always before thine eyes. This is the marriage of the saints. He was sentenced to be crucified in the usual manner, but he requested to be hung on the cross with his feet up, saying, I am not worthy to be hung on the cross like the Son of God hung and suffered on it. It is very interesting to read Thalman van Brott's interpretation of the story of St. Peter. And as
So that's some very deep, some very interesting history. So that's what we're looking at today. So we're looking at the historicity of the Bible. So it has all types of levels of history. Obviously, there's more in that book. That I just want to show you an example. He goes over that book some more and some other places and everything, and talk about John and how he got to Patmos and his persecution with Domitian, right? The Emperor Domitian, and talk about what happened with him. A lot of these are pinpoint accurate. That's what they are. A lot of these are pinpoint accurate. It just takes some time to sit there and examine. It just takes some time to sit there and examine these things. So the reason why I want to show you that, because trust the Bible. Understand, at first glance, don't be a Google master. Like when you just go to Google, and if it doesn't have the answer right then and there on the first page, then you give up. Don't do that. Don't be one of those people that, if they go and type something down and see what it actually is. Like, for example, you can just type down, when did Rome fall, right? When did Rome actually fall? A lot of times you'll see something like this, 3 AD, right? Or 300 AD, 400 AD, something like that, right? You'll see stuff around those numbers. Is that actually when Rome actually fell? historically? No, that's not actually the name of Rome changed by people who, what's the word I'm looking for? They changed the name, right? They'll call it, in fact, the western part of Rome they call Rome, but the whole thing was Rome. East Rome was Rome too. If you put East Rome, right, you get a different date. A whole different date. Why? East Rome, West Rome. But when did West Rome fall? Early on. Is that Rome? No. Constantine moved the capital of Rome to Constantinople. So always remember that. Whenever you see stuff, we type things down on Google or like the scriptures, double check, dig deeper in those things, because history and the Bible goes hand in hand. They collaborate together perfectly. They collaborate together perfectly. It's just that it's humans, it's us. Every man is a liar. Every man's a liar, but this word in its pure state, the word itself is truth. The word itself in its pure state is truth. Just understand that the word itself in a purest state is 100% true. And that's why I wanted to show you this. I wanted to show you this thing because it's important. It's absolutely important for you to know that the historicity of the Bible is authentic. The Bible is an authentic book that has multiple pieces of history and pinpoints in history that tell you the right time for these events. And we can find out when was Messiah's birth, when was his death. So we 100%, we all agree 27 AD was Messiah's baptism. Therefore, we can know his crucifixion by his 3-year ministry, and we can know his birth by just going back from 30 years from 27 AD. Just like that's undeniable. Historical reports report it too accurately to not get it right. That's important to know. That his baptism, we know. His baptism we have down because that's what's recorded in multiple different sources as well, with different ways about it. So now that you see this, the reason why I want you to understand this is that be careful with certain things like let me just type it down. Let's actually clear some of these tables here. Let's clear some of this and let's type down something. Let's just type something down. Let's just go Herod's death. So you see how I just typed down Herod's death? If you see something like that and someone says Messiah was born in 4 BC and you're like, well, there it is. It can't be 4 BC because Herod's there. You got to find out why do they say that's Herod's death. Look at the history behind it and see if it's actually that time frame. And because remember, every man's a liar. Even those that's recording history, sometimes they can be off too. And not that they're off. In fact, if you look a little closer, even like I said, if you look a little closer, you'll realize that this right here is actually not solid. It's not solid because once you start going into Herod and look at when it was, you'll actually see that Herod, like for example, like right here, here's a great example, right? It'll actually start telling you the truth, right? It'll start telling you 4 or 1 BC. Now that's going to change the game. Why would they even allow a Wikipedia post like this to be up there? 4 to 1 BC, that seems like a lie of history. But rather, we know that this is actually because of what's written by Josephus. And when looking at his writings very carefully, you can actually get the right point of time by going over those things. So I wanted to show you that right there. Also going over this, reviewing the history on these things. So you can see the historicity of these things. So that's what we just went over today. And these notes are in the description for a little more detail on those things. So that's the history. That's a little bit of history of the Bible. So you got a clear understanding of those things. And I guess since I'm at the end, I probably should give one more reminder of what we just did real fast on that one video that I had closed there. I think it's this one. I think so. In fact, no, it's not. It's on here. I'll just grab it from here. So just one more reminder, right? Just for these things, we got a lot of pinpoints in the scriptures, right? Luke 2 and 3 has a lot of time frames that's important to look into carefully. And we also have separate dedicated lives for that. But today, I just wanted to just pour it out, all the little history and everything, so that we can just take a look at the 1st and 2nd century history on these individuals and really understand that we need to stop just saying the belief of Christ is made by people who are Roman or stuff like that. We got to be careful, or else we're speaking in ignorance and not really knowing the history on these things, right? The history on these things, because the history is very detailed on on what happened there. So one more time, when did Herod die? Because this is actually a major controversy with believers. When did Herod actually die? I'm just going to get
Tiberius,
one more quick summary on here because
35-36
brother,
AD.
this man goes over it fairly well.
The
So just to get the perfect little summary there, I'll let it play.
4 BC date was basically established in the late 19th century by Emil Schur.
Let me just make
His,
sure this is the
see
spot
that 4
right
BC.
here.
Looks like a pretty good
All right, right
case,
here.
right? All the numbers seem to point to 4 BC at first glance. But the 4 BC date has challenges to it because Josephus adds more chronological details to Herod being declared king and his conquering of Jerusalem. Starting with the conquering of Jerusalem with its supposed date of 37 BC is that Josephus said more within the same statement by saying that this occurred exactly 27 years after Pompey's siege of Jerusalem, which occurred in the fall of 63 BC. So this moves the conquering from 37 to 36 BC. The fast, highlighted in pink, lets us know that this happened on the Day of Atonement, which is the 10th day of the 7th Jewish month. Josephus tethers another statement to this by saying that this ended the Hasmoneans' rule of 126 years. 1 Maccabees chapters 6 through 9 put the peace deal with the Romans in 162 BC, and adding 126 onto that gives you 36 BC as well. But Josephus included another significant detail about this year. He said that before this was a sabbatic year. Yes, these were still being practiced during the Second Temple period. Josephus explains how every 7th year that the Jews were letting the land rest, as the law required. 2 Chronicles explains that Israel's failure to keep it was part of the exiling punishment. And as such, the returnees learned this lesson and began keeping it again, as seen in Nehemiah, with the people agreeing to follow the Sabbath land rest rule. What adds to the 36th position is Wacholder's research on the topic, as he found 10 sources that can be dated with great accuracy and historically do fall on intervals of 7 years with significant events attached to them. And this makes a lot of practical sense because if you're going to attack a nation, you might as well do it when their food supply is really did nothing. Working off of the other 9 is that Herod's conquest must fall on the Tishri to Tishri overlap of 37-36 BC, with Herod's 3-month siege taking place during the summer and ending on the Day of Atonement, which, according to Finnegan, is October 25th, 36 BC. 2nd century Roman historian Dio said that Rome did nothing significant in the Syrian territory following the consulship of Claudius and Norbanus. You can see that their consulship was in 38 BC. So, 37 BC is the year of nothing, with the following year, 36 BC, being the year that Herod conquered Jerusalem. So, Herod's first regnal year over Jerusalem didn't start until Nisan of 35 BC. That places his 34th year occurring from the spring of 2 BC to the spring of 1 BC, which the January 10th 1 BC eclipse falls within, but does not allow for the December 29th 1 BC eclipse, as it falls 9 months after this window, and likewise puts the March 13th 4 BC eclipse way before it. In regards to Herod being named king by the Roman Senate, is that Josephus tethers his naming to Titus's destruction of Jerusalem with a 107-year time frame. With the destruction occurring very firmly in 70 AD, and then reversing back, is that it places the Senate's naming in 38 BC. That connects with Josephus saying that the conquering was in the 3rd year of Herod being made king. And one more tethering statement that puts the 40 BC view to rest is that Josephus says that the Battle of Actium occurred in Herod's 7th year, which lands you on 38 BC for the start of his Roman regnal years, and thus puts his death in 1 BC. Another drive-by point is that when he was about to die, Josephus says that he was nearly 70 years old. Why this is a really precise number is that it takes us back to his first position as governor of Galilee. Josephus says that Antipater, Herod's dad, made himself procurator of Judea in the 9th year of Hyrcanus II being the high priest, after Pompey's siege of Jerusalem and being restored back in the high priest position. Adding 8 full years onto this is that it lands you on 55-54 BC. Then, after Caesar sailed back to Rome, is that Antipater made Herod governor of Galilee at just 15 years old, with the included statement that he was very young. Now, since Herod was 15 in 55 BC, is that this makes his 70th or his birth year in 7069 BC. Thus, adding on the nearly 70 years is that it puts you on 1 BC, not 4 BC.
So that'll do it right there, family. So the reason why I'm showing you this is because trust the Bible. Take the time to, when you see things like someone's trying to discredit something, try to come to maybe a pastor or someone who's studying the history of the Bible, or reach out to somebody and really look into those things. Don't just turn away from the Bible because something seems like it's contradicting, because actually the Bible is more accurate than a lot of things of this world. The Bible is more accurate. It has historical reports that came to pass before our time, that came to pass as said. So just keep that in mind with those things when you read the book. So the New Testament, really sit there and dig into it, because I'm telling you without a doubt, the 1st century, the 2nd century, the 3rd century is full of sources of the first saints. It's full of sources. I recommend the book Martyr's Mirror. If you don't know about the history, if you want to know about the history, look up the book Martyr's Mirror, and that's going to have all types of 1st century and all types of century sources, all the way to the 1600s, about what the church fathers did and all those types of things and whatnot. I'm gonna show you one more thing. I'm gonna show you an interesting argument to show you that the saints kind of argued at that time. I got a really interesting one real fast. So you know about the mark of the beast. So if you know, I should have showed the one about John. I'm gonna give you a summary of the book of Martyrs. What happened with John? John, obviously, remember, he was sent to Patmos. The reason why is because he was preaching the gospel. He was spreading the gospel about Christ and everything. He was telling everything was happening. I'm going to show you something real fast on here. But before I do, pretty much he was, you know the story, right? He said, I, John, was in Patmos, right? Because of the bringing the word of God and everything in Revelation, right? And he actually went through it in Patmos. Basically, Patmos was an island that had a bunch of animals, wild animals on it. But John himself, before he went there, they tried to boil him in oil. They tried to boil John in oil, and it's probably easily to find, because it's actually a historical quote, because he was in Rome when they did this. But you know what happened when they tried to boil him in oil? He didn't burn. Domitian tried to do it. It's recorded. It's been written down in history that they tried to burn this John in this oil, but it didn't work. In fact, that's why they cast him to Patmos. When he got to Patmos, that's when he wrote Revelation. It's recorded in history that he was banished to Patmos. And Patmos is an island, like a prison, that the people, that's why he was in Ephesus, but the people in that land that was spreading the gospel, whoever sent them to Patmos, they thought they were going to die there, because there was a lot of deadly animals and stuff there. So John was abandoned there. Didn't even burn in the oil. But then after a certain time, he got released from Patmos. He came back from Patmos and he spread the revelation. Let me show you something that happened with his disciples when he was spreading the revelation. Let me show you something to show you that. Always remember, if you ever have any disagreements, they had disagreements too. Let me just read you this one right here. The most noteworthy, however, are the statements of, sorry if I say these names wrong, Irenaeus, the 2nd century bishop of Lanon, known to be a disciple of, what's that, Polycarp is believed to have been a disciple of John. So this person, connection. You see how it's working because this is the 2nd century, connected to John. He says connected to John, the author of Revelation. All right, so it just talks about some things. I'm gonna go down real fast and show you what was said right here. In book 5, chapter 28 of his work, he states that the number of the beast is 666. In addition, chapter 30 of the same work makes the following statement regarding the number 666. Now, watch what he says here. It's really interesting what they were dealing with. Such then, this is what he says. Such then, being the state of the case, and this number being around in all the most approved and ancient copies. Listen, you heard what he just said there? What did he just say there? He just said that they have copies. This is the 2nd century. This is why it's important for people to stop the saying, "Oh, there's no copies of the Bible." There is copies. In fact, that's why I'm gonna break down the Council of Nicaea and what actually happened, because a lot of people think that that's when they wrote the New Testament and they got all types of conclusions. I've seen all types of things. I've seen someone say Romans came up with it. That's just not knowing history. It's important to understand the history that they had, as it says right here, found in most approved and ancient copies of the Apocalypse, right? Apocalypse, what is he talking about? Revelation. He's talking about the book of Revelation right now. But we call it Revelation. At their time, they call it the Apocalypse. They called it the last message that John had, the last prophecy. And those men who saw John's face to face, those men who saw John face to face. So he's saying that these copies came from men who saw John face to face, bearing their testimony to it, while reason also led us to, let me go down a little bit, led us to conclude that the number of the name of the beast, if reckoned according to the Greek mode of calculation by the value the letter contained in it, will amount to 666. So obviously, what he's talking about? He's saying the Greek numbers, basically, when calculated, came up to 666. You probably already know about that and everything. Let's go down a little bit. But I just think it's so interesting to see conversations of the saints earlier. Portion in light, it says, I do not know how it is that some have erred. Now, watch what he's going to talk about here. Watch what he talks about here. He's going to talk about how he was dealing with saints in that time and how they erred and they changed the things in it. But there's saints that they're not going for it. There's a lot of people who look at this word so closely that they're not going for it. He says, I do not know how it is that some have erred, following the ordinary mode of speech, and have vindicated the middle. Let's go down. Watch what he says here. The middle number in the name. He's basically saying they changed the middle number in the name, but he's gonna get upset when he's gonna talk about it. Deducting the amount of 50 from it, so that instead of 6, what's that? Decade is probably a word that in Greek, decad. I'm probably saying that weird. Author notes a decad is 10. It says they will have it that there is but one. So, but one, the reason why, because they knocked off 5 letters. That brought it from 666 to 616. So he's saying that's an error. 616 is actually an error if you ever see that. It says they will have it that there is but one. I am inclined to think that this occurred through. He's basically saying, I believe that this occurred through the fault of the copyists. Because remember, they had to copy these things by hand. He's saying, I believe that this is the fault of the copyists, as it won't to happen, since numbers also are expressed by letter, so that the Greek letter, which expresses the number 60, was easily expanded into the letter lata of the. And obviously, you know what happened, right? Because I actually got to open up another note here to show you this, because you know what he's talking about here, right? He's actually talking about the change, right? If you know the Greek letters, I didn't mean to switch it like that, but I'm gonna click right here. I'm gonna show you something. The Greek letters changed. That's what happened over time. The Greek letters changed, and I'm gonna show you that right here. In fact, this might just have what I'm looking for. Well, I'll just open it here since I already opened this. That's why I just, you just do do the deep studies. You can find out some stuff at the back then how it was. They were still going through it with stuff like this. So right here, he's talking about the copy. It says the fault of someone who copied it. And it says so that the Greek letter which expressed the number. Right here, I'm gonna go right here. So what he's actually talking about, what happened, right? This is actually what it would look like. This is word for word. This is the 3rd century. This is 3rd century. This is 350 AD. So remember, in the 2nd century, he was defending this number. He was saying that this is actually, when I say defending it as in this what it is. But what is he talking about? He's talking about this change right here. As things started to change and whatnot, you're gonna have a little bit of right here, right? You're gonna have a little change as the time goes on and whatnot, as you get different texts. So it's working its way to putting those different texts and everything on there. So you notice in 300 AD, you're actually seeing the Byzantine writing. You're not seeing the ancient writing. You're seeing the Byzantine writing, the ancient Greek. You can see that right there. So that's why they were talking about that. Is it 616? The 616 is a mistype. But let's finish reading this. Let's see a little more what he's talking about here on those things. So it says expand into the letter iota, right? Because he turned it to iota instead of right here. This is a different one right here, right? I forgot how you say that. This one, I forgot what you call it. In fact, it might be here on this thing. What's this? C? It's probably C on there. But someone changed it from C to iota. That's what they did. They changed it from a C to iota. That's what he's complaining about there. That someone changed that letter and made it a 10, and they messed up, and he's mad about it. And it says right here in the Greek, the iota of Greeks. Others then received this reading without examining, without examination. They said they received this without examination. Some in their simplicity and upon their own responsibility, making use of this number expressing one decay, while some in their inexperience have ventured to seek out a name which should contain the erroneous. Look how they write. They're so. Could you imagine? Like these people they're more wiser. Like they almost seem like they speak so fresh. They speak so clean. But as you can see, I'm gonna try my best to seek out a name which should contain the erroneous, basically errored, and basically the wrong number. Basically, that's what he's saying. He's saying that they're basically spreading the wrong number, and they're defending it. They're defending the truth because a lot of them weren't inexperienced. That's all they did was the scripture. That's all that they did. It says in this illuminating passage, this person Irenaeus states that 666 is the reading found in most reliable copies of Revelation. So you understand that he's saying that there were copies in their time in the 2nd century that they knew was authentic, that they were spreading it on. And that's what the Council of Nicaea was. It was actually confirming what was going to be canonized, what was going to be unchangeable, what was going to be written down in multiple copies and given out to many people so that the copies won't be edited. In fact, do you know that that's how the Bible's preserved, by multiple copies? Why? Why is the Bible preserved in multiple copies? Because if you had an original copy and you change something on the original copy, everything's messed up. But what happens if you have multiple copies? If you have multiple copies, you can compare them. You can compare those copies to each other. And in fact, that's how we have reliable sources, because multiple people spreading the same information, if it all agrees, you know how it is. They find a witness and another witness. If it all agrees, that's what it is, right? So it just talks about Irenaeus states that 666 is the reading found in the most reliable copies of Revelation, including those copied by men who saw John, right? He's talking about, now remember, this is the 2nd century, but he's saying that he knows people all the way back then, reaching all the way to back then, that people who saw John, who was, this is talking about a direct disciple, right? In addition, he acknowledges the the existence of the 666, the 616 reading, but considers it erroneous, right? Basically error, right? It's an error. 2nd century. So going down a little bit, erroneous, copy, obviously, erroneous. All right, let's go down right here. I'm going to show you this one right here. As obviously they failed to copy those things, altering reading. It says, as the knowledge of the Greeks decreased in the ancient world, many translators of the Greek New Testament into the common languages of people were created, right? These early translators agreed in their readings of Revelation 13 and 18. The 5th century Armenian and obviously these groups of Syriac. I don't know why it's like that. Syriac of the 6th century, the Old Latin of the 13th century, because remember, they had to, remember, that's what the thing about, you got to translate it yourself by hand. You got to translate it all by hand. And that's what they had to do. They had to translate this all by hand. So you think about that. That's really deep when you think about that. They had to translate it all by hand into all these languages. So the cryptic, the Latin, Vulgate, all agreed that the number of the beast is 666. So just to show you that, and I want to show you what that looks like. Here's an ancient copy. Here's the Arab copy. This is actually this is what 616 looks like. This is the Arab copy right here. This is 616. This is the right copy right here. This is the right copy. 666 is what the number is. And this is actually the right copy. The reason why I looked that up, because I was just curious, because I heard that before, 616, but it was really interesting seeing the old conversation on these things. So I just want to show you that always know that there were saints dealing with the same issues that we think that is excluded only to us, but yet they were dealing with these types of things in their times. But they were very on it and very experienced with how the word's supposed to be, and they would speak if someone was in error with these things. So just know the Bible is a book that's been guarded. Remember, the Lord said it himself. He says his word is like silver, refined repeatedly, and it comes out to a great result when you actually take your time and look into these things. So I just give this as in a sense of understanding. The New Testament, the Old Testament is hermetic. It's absolutely hermetic. And it's one of those things that history agrees with. History and the facts of the things. These things are stuff that is always good to know. So praise be Yeshua HaMashiach. Hopefully this was something for someone. Understanding that the Bible is a history book, but it's a book that you also, when you compare with history or the world, do it carefully and thoroughly. Do it like you would do with something that's maybe you got a car or something, you got a problem with the car, you look carefully at it. You don't just say, I think it's a flat tire. I know the engine's boiling up, but I think it's a flat tire. You know what I'm saying? It's that's how the Bible is. You got to take your time when examining it because it's very deep. And if anyone just only believes the Old Testament, you're missing out on the Bible. If you only believe in the Old Testament and don't believe the New because maybe you think something's altered, you got to do your research. Don't just turn away because you think something. Actually look at the history and look at the facts on it. The prophecy is a complete agreement that Messiah is the word of God that entered into flesh that we were waiting for. He is God. He's from God, his word that became flesh. We don't have two gods. We have one. They're all one. It's important to understand that, but that's on levels when it comes to that thing. We're human, right? If we was to have another child, that's another child. But Messiah is one with God, but that's on levels when it comes to that. So just understand this when we talk about prophecy and history. We're not just going to go about this lightly. We're going about it as deep as it goes. So obviously looking at genetics and stuff and all that stuff, understand that's a side thing. Our profession is prophecy and history. Our profession is the gospel. That's our profession. So with that, family, if you have any questions or anything like that, or if you want to have a holy conversation on these things, let me know. These are advanced words. Yeah, exactly. I know this exactly. Those are the saints. That's good. I didn't even know. Yeah, that was one of those big things. Was it 6? Was that number and whatnot? But yes, amen, family. So with that, that's all I got. I just want to show and share the history today. So with that, family, be blessed, be beloved, and amen.